Hello there and welcome. Tonight, allow me to gently lead you through the forgotten alleyways of time, to the quiet corners of the medieval world, where shadows whispered secrets and fortune often wore the face of fate. Let your mind settle. Let the day's noise fall away like leaves on an autumn wind. Make yourself cozy, and if you wish, close your eyes. Now listen closely, as we begin a tale of dust and destiny, of those who rose from the mud and climbed into legend. Once upon a time, when castles ruled the hills and kings ruled the coin, when the clatter of hooves on cobblestone echoed like thunder through narrow streets, there lived a boy. No name carved in stone, no legacy waiting, just a boy, rag-wrapped and hollow-eyed, with a hunger not only in his belly, but deep in his bones, the hunger to become more. His name was Elric. Born beneath the eaves of a thatched stable behind a crumbling inn on the road to Durham, Aelric's first lullaby was the sound of horses stamping and men cursing. His mother, a tavern drudge who seldom smiled, died one winter's night when he was 6, succumbing to cold and cough while curled near the hearth. His father, if he had one, was never spoken of, and so the boy learned early how to listen without speaking, to watch the way a mouse moves under the table, to slip a crust of bread when backs were turned. The world did not notice him. That was his first great blessing. At 9, he found work mucking stalls at the nearby abbey. The monks did not like to speak, and so neither did he. For hours he would scrape and shovel, breathe in the sweet rot of hay and dung, and memorize the patterns of silence, the way Brother Aldwin's sandals dragged when he walked, the way the head monk tapped twice on the chapel door before entering. These small things became his knowledge. And knowledge, even then, felt like a secret coin hidden in the hem of his tunic. But it was the scriptorium that changed his life. One damp morning, while bringing buckets of water from the well, Elric tripped on a stone stair and spilled the entire contents across the stone floor of the writing hall. Parchments were soaked, ink scattered, and for a moment the entire world froze. He expected the cane, the lash, the dismissal, but instead a bent old man with fingers stained black as crow's master wings looked at him and asked, "Can you read?" Elric shook his head wide-eyed. "Would you like to?" He nodded, almost imperceptibly. And that was the moment. Brother Cinewulf took him in, not as a son nor a pupil, but as a silent shadow. Aelric learned letters like a starving man learns food, the curves of Latin, the shapes of Old English, the delicate brushwork of illuminated capitals, all became as familiar as breath. He learned to grind pigments, to stretch vellum, to prepare quills. But most of all, he learned stories. Tales of kings and saints, of Arthur and Beowulf, of Judas and Job, of men who were nothing and became everything. By 15, Elric could write faster than many of the novices. His hand was graceful, his memory sharp, but he was still a servant, a bastard child of no name, and ambition, that quiet golden fire, had begun to burn in him brighter than ever. Then came the day of the nobleman. Sir Brandegast of Caerlow passed through the abbey one afternoon in early spring, seeking shelter on his pilgrimage north. He was a tall man, all velvet and steel, his cloak stitched with lions and antlers, his boots polished like mirrors. And beside him walked his daughter, Lady Isolde, with eyes like grey storms and silence deeper than a well. Elric, assigned to bring food to their quarters, entered quietly and bowed low. He said nothing. But when Sir Brandegast saw the writing on the edge of the parchment Elric carried, a draft copied from Bede's Ecclesiastical History, he frowned. "You wrote this?" the knight asked. Elric nodded. "Do it again." So he did, kneeling on the floor by the firelight, reciting as he wrote. His hand never trembled. Sir Brandegast watched with narrowed eyes and said no more. But the next morning he left behind a sealed scroll for the abbot. 3 days later, Elric was summoned. Not scolded, not praised, simply told. He was to be sent south to study under a royal scribe at the court of King Edward. And so the stable boy became a student of kings. He rode in a cart full of hay, between crates of salted fish and bundles of wool, through winding lanes and over river bridges, past fields blooming with spring and towns bustling with market calls. Every sound, every scent, every face, he memorized it all. Because he knew this was the border between the life he had known and the life he would create. The court was a world of marble and echo, of whispers dressed in lace and secrets hidden behind smiles. Elric, dressed in plain wool, was eyed with amusement, but soon that amusement turned to respect. He copied charters, translated scrolls, drafted speeches. He listened when he was not meant to and remembered what others forgot. He learned how power moves, not like a hammer, but like a feather floating just above the flame. And he waited for the right moment to rise. It came with the death of a lord. When Baron Elric of Northvale died childless, leaving behind lands disputed by 3 claimants, the court teetered on the edge of chaos. Old parchments were demanded, legal proofs unearthed, and it was Elric, now nearly a man, who found in the back of the royal library a forgotten scroll, sealed with wax faded nearly to dust. A land deed, one that settled the matter, one that spared the realm from months of feuding, and the king noticed. Within the week, Elric was named royal archivist. But this was only the beginning, for in the shadows of parchment and power, of candles and cloaks, he would climb further still, from rags to riches, from silence to speech, from stable boy to legend, and now, let us rest here for just a while. The night is still long, and Elric's journey, it has only just begun. The wind over London tasted of ink and iron. Beneath the high windows of the Royal Library, where sunlight filtered through latticed glass in patterns like golden vines, Elric sat with a quill between his fingers and the weight of a realm in his thoughts. Now 20, he no longer smelled of horses or hay. His tunic was of deep blue wool, edged modestly in thread of silver, and though he never asked for fine clothing, it was gifted quietly, a sign of rising trust. He wore no ring, bore no crest, and yet, as he walked the corridors of power, noblemen leaned subtly aside. His face remained unreadable, but his mind, it moved like smoke through the rafters of the world. Word of his rise spread, though few believed the full tale. Whispers passed in corners. The orphan who found a king's signature, the boy who reads faster than a falcon dives, the servant who maps secrets. But Elric did not seek glory. He sought permanence. Something the cold couldn't take, something that would outlive even the stone of Westminster. Each morning, he rose before the first bell, lighting candles and tracing maps of land boundaries, recording taxes, translating papal orders, and slowly, ever so subtly, he was drawn into the affairs of realm and crown. But the kingdom was not quiet. A drought had curled the earth of the south into cracked leather, crops failed, prices rose, and in the north, petty lords grew restless. One, Lord Wulfric of Dunmere, had begun refusing tribute, barricading grain within his granaries. The king, weary from gout and recent losses in Normandy, hesitated. Elric did not. In silence, he drafted a letter. No seal, no name, just words. He sent it north by courier, carried with a copy of the ancient grain levies agreed upon in the reign of King Ethelred. Along with it, he sent a message written in Wulfric's own dialect, a linguistic detail he had picked up from old northern chronicles and Wulfric's correspondence. The message was clear. Your ancestors bent knee to parchment and law. Will you be lesser than them? Weeks passed. Then, one fog-drenched morning, a cart rolled into court bearing grain from Dunmere. The letter was never acknowledged, but the defiance ended, and the courtiers turned their eyes toward Elric, no longer as a curiosity, but as something far more dangerous. One of them was Chancellor Berengar. Heavy of brow and slow of speech, Berengar had for years controlled the scribes, the taxes, and the seals. He wore rings that clinked like coins and moved with the pride of men who believe the world owes them permanence. He invited Elric to supper. It was not a request. The meal was held in a small chamber behind the scriptorium. The walls were covered in tapestries, dragons devouring wolves, lions crowned in fire. A servant poured wine as dark as blood. Berengar smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. "You've been busy," he said. Elric nodded, "as duty demands." "And clever," Berengar added, tasting the word as if it might bite him. "But clever men often forget their place, or mistake the wind for their own breath." Elric said nothing. Silence had always been his most fluent language. Berengar leaned forward. "You've no name, no coat of arms, yet you sit among lords and move the king's hand. How long do you think that will last?" Still, Elric did not speak. Berengar laughed, dry and hard. "You think knowledge is enough. That ink will protect you, but ink spills and memory fades, and when power shifts, the first to fall are those who rose without armour." He raised his cup in mock salute. "Be careful, boy." That night, Elric did not sleep. He sat by his small hearth, staring at the flames, listening to the whispers in the smoke. He understood the warning, but he also understood something far deeper. Berengar was afraid, because men like Berengar built power on inheritance, on name, on fear. But Elric had built his on truth, and truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. From that day on, Elric became more careful, but not slower. He studied genealogy, traced every name in the court, memorized who held what land, who owed what debt, who kept secrets behind closed doors. He became the court's quiet cartographer of corruption. Then came the crisis that would change everything. One morning, the royal treasurer, a crooked man named Dunstan of Kent, was found dead, not by blade or poison, but from a fall down the spiral stairs of the East Tower. His ledgers were gone, burned, it was said. The treasury was in disarray, debts unpaid, gold missing. The court panicked. And once again Elric stepped forward. He requested 3 days, no more. Within that time, he recreated nearly the entire royal account by memory. He knew which merchant had delivered salt in January, which knight had overpaid his levy in Lent, which abbey had been exempted because he had read, remembered and redrafted nearly every line for years. He presented the ledgers at council. Balanced, cross-referenced, sealed. The king, pale and worn, stared at the pages with trembling hands. "You've saved the crown," he whispered, and with that he stood. Before the entire court, King Edward lifted a narrow band of gold, simple, unadorned, and placed it on Elric's brow. A new title was spoken, one that had not been used in 2 generations. Master of Records and Royal Knowledge. Gasps followed. Berengar's cup shattered on the floor, but Elric merely bowed. That night he returned to his chamber. Alone, the fire low, the wind sighing beneath the shutters, he touched the band of gold, not with pride, but with reverence. From stable boy to royal memory, from dust to ink to power. But even now, something deeper stirred in him. This was not his final destination. This was still the middle of his climb, and the road ahead would be darker, stranger, and more dangerous than anything he had yet known. The winter that followed was cruel and quiet. Frost clung to the eaves of Westminster like silver bones, and the river froze in places where even the swans refused to tread. The city fell into stillness. Merchants shuttered their stalls early, and the common folk wrapped themselves in wool and prayer. But behind the high stone walls of the royal court, firelight flickered late into the night, and within that glow, Elric worked. Now bearing the title Master of Records and Royal Knowledge, he was no longer merely a shadow at the table. He was summoned, consulted, feared. The nobles glanced toward him when decisions stalled. Bishops paused when he stepped into the chamber, as if the very presence of his memory unsettled the stone of their confidence. And yet, Elric spoke little. He moved like ink on parchment, smooth, inevitable, and quietly permanent. But it is one thing to rise by merit, and another to survive among those born with daggers stitched into their smiles. Behind the thick tapestries and oak-panelled chambers, the whispers multiplied. They spoke of a scribe who thinks himself sovereign, of a peasant crowned in parchment. Some said he had bewitched the king. Others claimed he carried a heretical text beneath his robes. And one, a gaunt duke with eyes like glass, warned aloud in council, "When a man of no name carries the king's voice, soon he will seek the crown's weight as well." Elric did not reply. He simply wrote. But not all pages were inked with law and ledgers. In the deepest corner of the library, far, far from the gaze of the watchful monks, Elric began transcribing something else, a secret document, a codex of his own making, a record of alliances, betrayals, bribes, and the invisible strings that bound the nobility together like marionettes on a grand stage. He called it the Veiled Ledger. Each night after his duties were done and the courtiers retired to drink and dice, Elric would light a single candle, open the thick-bound volume and begin his quiet work. Names, dates, gestures, debts, all committed first to memory, then carefully inked on vellum with a hand that did not tremble. He did not seek to blackmail or destroy. No, it was deeper than that. He was building insurance, not against poverty nor disgrace, but against erasure, because he knew what they feared most was not his title, nor his knowledge, but the fact that he could not be undone with a simple lie. Then came Lady Isolde again. After years abroad, married, widowed and returned, she stepped into the royal court like a storm wrapped in silk. Her hair darker now, braided in the southern style. her voice low, refined, and edged like a sharpened needle. She remembered Elric. She always had. He did not show it, but the sight of her sent ripples through him, not of longing, but of something older, recognition. She too was shaped by exile, sharpened by observation, wrapped in the armour of things unspoken. It was she who approached him first. In the gallery above the chapel, as the monks chanted vespers and their voices echoed like ghostlight against the stones, she stood beside him and whispered, "I see they still underestimate you." He glanced at her. "Not all of them." She smiled faintly. "No, some of them are simply afraid." He nodded once. "That is enough." Over the weeks that followed, they crossed paths more often, always in quiet places. The herb garden at dusk, the scriptorium before dawn, the cloister when the bells had just rung. She asked questions others dared not. He answered with fragments. She listened not for words, but for intent. And then one night she placed a sealed letter in his hand. It bore no name, no seal, only one line. "What do you know of Lord Malwyn?" Elric returned to his chambers with the letter still unopened, but his mind had already begun to stir. Lord Malwyn, the Earl of Tavmere, was a man of immense land and thin loyalty, quiet, calculating and famously neutral in every court conflict. But there had been rumours, secret shipments leaving his ports, letters to Normandy, hidden coin. Elric opened the letter. Inside was a name, a ship, a date, and a single word, witness. It was an invitation, or a trap, perhaps both, but he had never feared either. The next morning, Aelric rode out before the sun, cloaked in a plain traveller's garb. He took no retinue, no page, only a single saddlebag and a dagger sewn into his boot. 3 days later, he arrived at the port town of Merrow's Reach, the harbour under Lord Malwyn's control. There, under cover of darkness, among the smell of fish and salt and wet rope, he watched. A ship, unmarked, yet heavily guarded, took on cargo by torchlight, barrels sealed with wax, crates branded with no crest. Aelric noted every detail, every face. He saw a hooded man pass a velvet pouch to a foreign sailor, saw a knight's crest, one of Malwyn's household guard, shine briefly beneath the moonlight. It was treason, quiet, profitable, carefully hidden, but not from him. Aelric left before dawn. When he returned to court, he made no proclamation. He wrote no accusation. Instead, he sent a single message to Lord Malwyn. "I know what you trade. I know whom you serve. I ask for nothing. But if my name is ever spoken in malice, the crown will know." No reply came. But within a fortnight, Malwyn made a generous donation to the royal treasury. His alliances shifted, and at the next council, he raised no objection when Aelric was asked to oversee a new commission, one that placed him directly in control of all royal communications. The scribe had become the voice had become the memory, and the memory was becoming immortal. Aelric returned to his chamber that night, opened the veiled ledger, and added one more entry, not out of vengeance, but because even silence needs a witness. The snow melted slowly that spring, retreating from the cobblestones like a defeated army. The river Thames, once locked beneath plates of brittle ice, began to breathe again, sluggish, grey, and wide. In the capital, the scent of thaw mixed with smoke and sweat, and life, as it always did, crept back into the bones of the city. But for Aelric, the season did not bring renewal. It brought attention. And attention, he had learned, was a weight, not easily shaken. His new title had placed him at the centre of the kingdom's most delicate affairs. Ambassadors now sought private audiences with him. Bishops sent letters veiled in scripture but thick with political hint, and merchants attempted gifts, rare ink, jewelled styluses, even promises of shares in distant voyages. He refused them all. Not from pride, but from design. He knew what they sought. Not his friendship, not his favour, but proximity to the man who had become the king's mind. And proximity, like fire, both warms and burns. Aelric burned slowly. Then came the summons. One evening, just as dusk wrapped the spires of Westminster in shades of rose and ash, a boy, no more than 12, but dressed in the livery of the crown, arrived at Aelric's chamber. "You're wanted," the boy whispered, "by the Queen Dowager." Aelric paused. Queen Dowager Aldetha, widow to the late king, stepmother to the reigning Edward, was a figure of myth more than memory. She had not been seen at court in nearly a decade, having retreated to a quiet manor west of London after her husband's death. Some said she had gone mad. Others said she merely tired of the endless plots. But all agreed on one thing. She did not summon people lightly. He dressed carefully, not richly but plainly, a dark robe, a clasp of brass, and a small leather-bound book tucked beneath his arm. His mind raced, not with fear but calculation. The manor was draped in ivy and silence, servants moved like ghosts, and in the highest chamber, beneath a canopy of faded tapestries and the dull glint of forgotten heraldry, she waited. Old, yes, but not weak, her eyes pale blue and clouded with age fixed on him as he entered. "You are the scribe," she said. "I am Elric." "Not born of name?" "No, my lady," she smiled thinly. "Good, names are prisons, best to build without them." She motioned to a stool. "Sit," he did. For a time, neither spoke. Then, in a voice softer than snow on leaves, she said, "Do you know why I sent for you?" "I do not presume." "But you guess." He nodded. "Something stirs, beneath the court, behind the smiles." She looked away toward the shuttered window. "Yes, and it has teeth." She turned back to him, suddenly sharp. "They are planning, not against the king. No, they would not dare. Not yet, but against the throne itself, against the future." Elric listened. "There are whispers of succession, of distant cousins with claims and coin, of pacts made across the sea. Edward is childless, and you hold too many strings." He said nothing. "You must begin to cut them." He frowned slightly. "You would have me weaken?" "No, I would have you survive." Then she lifted a small bundle wrapped in velvet from beside her chair and handed it to him. Inside, an old scroll, brittle with age, royal seal, unbroken. He raised his eyes. "It is a will," she whispered. "My husband's, one no one has seen, one they buried after his death." Elric felt the weight of it. "And it changes the line?" "No," she said softly. "It clarifies it, it ensures it, but that will not please all." He stood slowly. "Why give it to me?" She smiled, a crack in her dignity. "Because you remember what others forget. Because you are not a lion or a serpent, you are something rarer. A candle that chooses not to burn the parchment it reads." He bowed and took the scroll. By the time he returned to Westminster, night had settled like a lid upon the city. He walked the halls with measured pace, the scroll hidden deep in his cloak. In his chamber beneath the candlelight, he read it. The will was clear. The crown was to pass, failing Edward, to a niece, a girl raised in the far reaches of Wales, unmentioned in court gossip, unknown to many, but legitimate, unmistakable. He folded the scroll and locked it in an iron box beneath his bed, and he waited. Days passed, then weeks. He watched, noticed, traced movements, and slowly patterns emerged. Letters routed strangely through Calais, guests arriving to the court bearing no gifts but speaking in private with key lords. A sudden increase in guards posted near the treasury despite no sign of unrest. And then, late one evening, as he left the royal chapel, a hand grabbed his arm. It was Lord Halric, a low-born baron raised through valour, not blood. Elric had always respected him, but Halric's face was pale, strained. "They plan to move against you," he whispered. "Berengar is gathering signatures." "For what?" "To strip you of office, to accuse you of altering documents, of forging the king's will." Elric's pulse did not rise. "Why tell me this?" Halric hesitated. "Because I have seen the true ledgers, and because men like Berengar believe they are history. You record it." Elric nodded, and then he began to write. That night, 20 identical letters were penned, each one bearing a careful copy of the king's original will alongside a record of its seal, its material, its history. Each letter was sent to a different bishop, each via a different courier, and within each was a warning: if I am removed, erased, or found lifeless, deliver this to the Pope. He did not sleep that night, nor the next. But when the court convened, and Berengar stood with a scroll in hand and a gleam in his eye, ready to speak poison, something changed. The king spoke first. He stood, slowly, painfully, and held aloft the old will, the true one. "This," he said, "was brought to me in silence, verified in secret, and protected by one who serves not himself but the realm." He turned toward Elric. "My memory lives in this man's mind, my future in his hands." "And Berengar?" He bowed stiffly, and never returned to court again. That evening, Elric walked alone in the garden where frost still clung to the edges of the stone path. The stars were faint, the moon thin, and though the night was cold, a warmth spread quietly within him. Not of victory, but of survival, of one more page turned, one more trap avoided. And beyond the hedges, the next chapter waited. The court had quieted, but silence in power was never peace. It was merely a pause before the next breath of storm. Elric walked through those days with a gaze sharpened by survival and a step softened by experience. The crisis with Berengar had not destroyed him. It had revealed him, to the king, to the court, and most dangerously, to those who watched from beyond the borders of the realm. Letters began to arrive bearing wax unfamiliar to Westminster, one from Aquitaine, another from Bruges, a third unsigned but bearing the unmistakable scent of frankincense, the kind burned in Roman chapels. Each message was veiled, couched in platitudes and riddled with suggestion. Each spoke of shared understanding, of ink stronger than swords, of a Europe that watched England's stability with more than passing interest. Elric read them all, then burned each one by the same flame. He would not play on foreign boards. Not yet. Instead, he turned his gaze inward to the city itself. London, in its sprawl and soot, held more truth than the court ever dared to admit. Beneath its rooftops and behind its markets lay the pulse of the realm, not in its gold, but in its people. And among them a new voice was stirring. Preachers, unlicensed and fiery, declaring that the nobility had strayed from God, that the scribes were servants of lies, that the poor would inherit not the earth, but the ruins left behind by lords and their ink-stained enablers. One name surfaced again and again, Father Malric, once a minor monk in Essex, now a prophet of alleys and taverns. His sermons, whispered through the mouths of traders and fishmongers, called Elric, the parchment prince, a man who wrote the world to suit his own rise. He spoke of corruption dressed in robes, of names forgotten by God but remembered by devils. Elric knew better than to ignore words. So one dusk, dressed in a plain cloak and walking without escort, he entered the West Quarter, the mud-choked heart of the city, and found the crowd. They were gathered in a ruined courtyard where ivy climbed broken stones and rain pooled in the corners. Lanterns swayed from hooks, faces turned as he passed, but none recognised him in the shadow. At the centre stood Malric, bearded, thin, hands like talons, his voice rough but magnetic. "And while you toil in smoke and bone," he cried, "they sit behind veils of vellum. They rewrite the world and call it truth. They bind you not in chains but in ink, and the worst of them smile while doing it." The crowd murmured. A woman wept. A boy nodded fiercely. Elric stood still. Then Malric's eyes found him. He faltered. Elric stepped forward. Slowly, silently, the crowd parted. "I would speak," he said. Murmurs rippled. Malric narrowed his eyes. "And who are you, cloaked stranger, to speak in the house of those cast aside?" Elric removed his hood. Some gasped, others stepped back. Malric's voice dropped. "The scribe himself walks among the ash." "I do," Elric replied, his voice calm. "Because I write not for kings, I write for memory, and memory belongs to all, even those with no coin to buy it." He turned to the crowd. "You suffer. I do not deny it. But know this, I was not born in a hall. I was born behind one. I knew hunger before I knew language, and I rose not because I was chosen, but because I listened." He paused, "and I still do." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Malric laughed. "A clever tongue for a clever man, but listening changes nothing." Elric stepped closer. "Then let us speak, not before a crown, but here, in mud, in cold. Name your hour, I will return. No guards, no robes, just questions and truths." Malric stared at him, and then, with a crooked smile, nodded. 3 nights hence." So it was agreed. 3 days passed like wind over brittle leaves. The court remained unaware. Elric told no one. Not the king, not even Lady Iselda, who had returned to her estate beyond the river. He arrived alone. The courtyard was fuller this time. Lanterns burned bright. Guards watched from rooftops, unseen but present. Not Elric's, but Malric's. Protection, perhaps, or a show of dominance. Malric stood on a cracked stone dais. "Speak," he said. Elric did. He spoke not of laws or ledgers, but of his mother, her silence, her calloused hands, her death beneath a borrowed blanket. He spoke of the abbey, of parchment as warmth, of knowledge as escape. He spoke of the night he first lit a candle and chose not to curse the darkness, but to write beneath it. Then Malric asked, "Do you believe the poor deserve their place?" "No," Elric said. "But I believe they are kept there not by scribes, but by those who fear what the poor might become if they remembered who they were." "Then why serve kings?" "I do not serve kings, I serve memory. And memory is the only thing that can hold power to account." Malric said nothing. But that night, no sermon followed. The next morning, Elric found a letter slipped beneath his chamber door. It was unsigned, the script unrefined, but it read, "I still do not trust you, but I will not turn the fire against you. For now." It was enough, and from then on, the fires in the city dimmed. Aelric had not silenced them. No, he had spoken with them, and in doing so ensured that the voices rising from the mud would not be raised against the parchment, but written upon it. The rains came hard that summer, thick, unrelenting sheets that turned roads to rivers and fields to swamps. Trade slowed, flooded granaries spoiled, tensions curled beneath every conversation like smoke beneath a door. But within the stone walls of Westminster, the work did not stop, and neither did Elric. Each morning, by the light of 2 candles and a small hearth, he reviewed letters from every corner of the kingdom. Tax assessments, harvest reports, parish complaints, notes from lords disguised as pleasantries. And beneath each he read the lines not written, the motives buried between phrases, the patterns stitched together across distance and time. It was during this deluge of damp days and muddy truths that a new figure appeared, not in court, not in noble house, but in ink. She signed her letters only as Corvina. The first parchment arrived folded within a ledger of ship registries from the southern ports. At first glance, it seemed an addendum, a minor correction on tonnage and tariffs. But Elric's eye caught a detail. A mark of measurement written in an old dialect used only in the borderlands of Gascony. He unfolded the paper fully. There, written in clean, sharp hand, "Your enemies believe you rely only on what is spoken. I write because I know better." It was unsigned, no seal. But beneath the final line was a symbol, a quill crossed with a sword. He turned the paper over, nothing else. No clue of its origin, but over the weeks that followed, more arrived, each time hidden in plain sight, folded between reports from distant towns, scribbled in margins of copied sermons, once tucked into the lining of a wine invoice, always the same symbol, always a fragment of hidden truth. The Bishop of Selwyn reroutes tithe to a manor outside the realm. 3 ships bearing the seal of Lord Halden never reached Calais. They docked in Bruges under false flags. A bride is coming from Navarre. She is not what she claims to be. Elric did not respond. He could not. There was no return, and yet he began to rely on her. This faceless ink alley, Corvina. She became a mirror to his mind, a ghost in the shadows he could not reach. Her notes did not contradict his findings. They deepened them, extended them into places even he could not see. Then one morning, after a long night cataloguing land disputes, he found a new message. This one sealed in wax, dark blue, almost black, and pressed with the same crossed symbol. He opened it slowly. "They plan to offer you a bride." The handwriting was slightly different. Rushed. "Refuse." That was all. He stared at the words. By midday, the royal herald summoned him to the king's study. King Edward Oldenau, face drawn and beard more white than silver, welcomed him with a warmth that still bore traces of exhaustion. "You have served me well, Elric," he said. "It is my duty, and your duty has earned reward, not in coin, not in title, but in alliance." Elric said nothing. The king continued. "House Elrowan of the western coast has long been loyal. Their daughter, Lady Catraine, is young, educated and unwed. Her family seeks to secure her future with honour. I seek to secure your place in this court with permanence." Elric's pulse steadied. "It is a gift," the king added. "You need not answer now." But he already had. Later that evening, he penned a response. Respectful, grateful, but firm. He declined, no reason given, no insult made, only truth veiled in courtesy. The court murmured in the days that followed. Some claimed arrogance, others whispered scandal, but the king said nothing. And the matter faded, except with Corvina. For the first time her message changed tone. "You listened. That is rare. Now I ask for something in return." Elric leaned back in his chair, candlelight flickering on the edge of the parchment. The next line, "There is a name I need erased from the royal census." He paused. It was a dangerous ask. Erasure was more than deception. It was deletion from memory. Elric had never done it, had sworn to never do it. He read the name, a girl, 11 years old, listed as ward of a merchant in Kent. There was no note of crime, no hint of treason. And yet, Corvina asked. He did not move, not for a long time. Then he opened the veiled ledger, his secret record of the kingdom's hidden truths. He added a new page. not under treason, not under corruption. A new section, unanswered debts. He wrote the girl's name and left it there. Days passed. Corvina wrote again. You didn't erase her, he replied, for the first time with ink invisible to the naked eye, a technique taught to him by monks in the abbey long ago. A mix of lemon and ash revealed only with heat. He wrote, memory is my oath, not my weapon. Her next message bore no warnings, no riddles, only a single line. Then I will find another way. She was testing him. That much was now clear, not as an enemy, not as an ally, as something in between, the kind of figure who moved just outside the reach of titles, who respected principle but served purpose. And though the messages resumed, something had shifted. Trust, once growing, had cooled. But Elric was no stranger to the cold. In the weeks that followed, he worked as he always had, silently, carefully, but every time he opened a scroll, he looked first for her mark. Every time he saw a ledger, he scanned for unfamiliar hands. And when he sat alone at night, listening to the rain kiss the shutters, he wondered not who Corvina was, but what she was willing to become. The summer turned to ash, not in flame, but in that brittle way the leaves dry early and the air carries a sharpness too soon for harvest. The skies grew pale, the wind held an unfamiliar chill, and with the changing season, something beneath the surface of the realm shifted. Elric could feel it, in the way the scribes fumbled with ink pots they once handled with grace, in the way the king paused more often mid-sentence as if searching for words he once summoned easily, in the way the messengers arrived at stranger hours and left without lingering. The balance was tilting, slowly, invisibly, but with certainty. And then it cracked. On the morning of the feast of St. Edwin, with bells ringing through a grey sky and the scent of barley bread heavy in the courtyard, a rider arrived, soaked, breathless and bloodied. He carried a broken staff. Elric recognised it at once. The symbol of a royal courier, snapped at the centre, a sign not of accident but urgency. The rider fell to his knees before the gates of Westminster, clutching a scroll sealed not in wax but in thread, a knotwork only used in times of treason. Aelric was summoned at once. The scroll was unwrapped in the king's private chamber. Only 3 men present, Edward, Aelric and Lord Halric, who had remained steadfast since the day he warned Aelric of Berengar's betrayal. The letter was short. A barony in the north, Sealharrow, had fallen silent, its garrison unresponsive, its lord unaccounted for, reports of fire, missing priests and strange coins bearing a crest no one could trace. Bandits, the king asked. No, Elric murmured. This is deliberate, Halric frowned. How can you be sure? Elric handed him the scroll. Because of this. There, at the base of the parchment, etched faintly into the margin, was a small symbol, a quill crossed with a sword. Corvina. She had seen this coming, or had sent it coming. The silence in the room deepened. I must go north, Halric said at last. Elric turned toward him. No, the king interrupted. You are needed here. Then he looked to Elric. You have eyes in every abbey, every ledger, every grain bag, but do you have feet? It was not a challenge. It was a command wrapped in a question. Elric bowed. I will ride. He prepared for the journey with a precision that surprised even him. He chose only one companion, a former monk named Ewan, quiet, tall, and trained with both quill and blade. His past was shrouded in exile, but Elric trusted his silence more than another's oath. They rode at dawn. The road to Sealharrow passed through forests thinning with autumn and villages wrapped in suspicion. Each night, Elric made camp not in taverns, but near old chapels, trusting the sanctity of stone more than the false warmth of coin. On the 4th day, they reached the outlands of Sealharrow. It was worse than the scroll had hinted. The air smelled of soot and damp rot. Crops had been left to decay. The town gate hung broken, splintered as if by a battering ram. And worst of all, silence. That heavy, unnatural kind, like the breath held before thunder. They entered cautiously. No bodies, no banners, no dogs barking from behind fences, just absence. They passed the marketplace. Fruit rotting in baskets, a spilled bolt of cloth fluttering like a ghost on the stones. At the central hall, they found the first sign of life. A boy, no older than 10. Alone, eyes wide, feet bare, hands wrapped tightly around a dull iron key. He did not run. He did not speak. Elric dismounted, knelt. What happened? The boy's voice was barely more than a breath. They came from the sea, but not on ships. Elric's blood turned cold. He asked gently, "What did they take?" The boy blinked. "Not gold," he whispered. "Not food." "Then what?" The boy's eyes shifted upward, past Aelric, toward the burned tower of the old scriptorium. "Names," he said. That night, Aelric sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The wind moaned through the empty town, and somewhere far off, an owl cried once, then fell silent. "Names," he repeated to himself. The next morning, in the ruins of the scriptorium, Aelric and Ewan uncovered the ash of scrolls, the shattered remnants of seal rings, and a narrow hidden drawer behind the altar stone. Inside, a single page spared by fire. It bore one word: Catalyst. Neither of them recognized it, but Elric did not speak it aloud. He simply folded the page, placed it into his satchel, and stood. "We ride south," he said. Back in Westminster, days later, he returned to his chamber, where the city hummed, unaware of what had been lost. He opened the veiled ledger, turned to a new page, and wrote, "The fires no longer seek land or gold, they seek memory." Then he drew the crossed quill and sword, but this time he drew a crack through the middle, a split. He did not yet know what catalyst was, but he knew what it meant. Something or someone was trying to erase more than lives. They were trying to erase the record, the truth, the names. And Elric had built his entire existence upon the promise that nothing, once remembered, could be undone. Now someone was proving him wrong, and he would not allow it to happen again. The rains had left, but the chill remained. Aelric sat alone in his chamber, the faint crackle of the hearth whispering in the silence. He held the folded page from Cael Harrow in his hand, its single word etched with a precision that unsettled him more than fire or blood ever had. Catalyst! Not a name he knew, not a place in any of the maps he'd memorized, not a word found in the Latin glossaries or monkish annals stored in the Royal Archive. Yet it carried the weight of something ancient, something deliberate, a ghost of a truth meant to be forgotten. He spent the next 3 days in seclusion, poring through forbidden books, private letters, and monastic chronicles long dismissed as ramblings, each document read with relentless focus, his meals untouched, his sleep broken and sparse. But on the 4th night, buried in a weather-stained manuscript on heretical sects disbanded a century prior, he found it again. Catalyst, not a name, but a doctrine. A belief held in secret by a splintered order of scribes and philosophers who once walked the libraries of Carthage and Antioch. Their teachings were outlawed, their writings burned, their leaders scattered and hunted. Their creed? That the written word was a prison, that memory, recorded, could be forged into chains of power. That true freedom could only be achieved by the deliberate erasure of all histories, all names, all lineage. To unmake what had been made, and in that void, build a new beginning, not through war, not through rebellion, but through forgetting. Elric sat still for a long time. He thought of the vanished scrolls at Cael Harrow, of the girl Corvina had asked to be erased, of the names now fading from records across the realm. Someone was reviving catalysts, and worse, they were succeeding. That night he summoned Ewan and handed him 3 scrolls. "Deliver these in secret. One to the Bishop of Thorn, one to the Steward of Armarth, the last to Lady Isolde." Ewan nodded without question. When the door closed, Elric took out a fresh sheet of vellum and began to write, not in Latin but in the old tongue of his mother, barely remembered from lullabies half a lifetime ago. He wrote a name, then below it the word "do not forget," and with it he began the creation of a second ledger, hidden from the veiled one, concealed in ink made from ash and oak gall, unlisted in any record but his own memory. This would be his safeguard, his rebellion, the Book of the Unforgotten. Days turned to weeks. Whispers reached the court. Monasteries reporting inexplicable thefts of baptismal rolls, royal tax offices finding entire lineages erased from the archives, some lords rising to find their titles no longer recognised by the ancient seals. Worse still, those who questioned the missing names often vanished themselves, disappearing into accidents, falling from towers, drowning in shallow streams. The kingdom was not at war, but it was bleeding. One name came up again and again, Marcion. At first, Elric thought it a coincidence, a merchant here, a scribe there. But soon he saw the pattern, different places, different faces, same name, not as a person, as a cipher, a title. The one who deletes. And Corvina silent. No messages in weeks, no signs, no marks. until one morning, a single parchment was found pinned to the door of the Royal Library. No seal, no signature, just the words, "I warned you, you hesitated, now they burn the roots." And beneath it, in small slanted script, "Find the archivist of Durnholder." Durnhold, a crumbling border stronghold long abandoned by court interest, half library, half fortress, buried in fog, too distant for politics, too sacred for commoners. Few remembered it even existed, but Aelric did. He had seen its name once in the corner of a faded map, a place where royal archivists had once stored secrets too dangerous for the vaults beneath Westminster. He prepared to leave at once, not with banners, not with a procession. Only Ewan, only silence, and the Book of the Unforgotten, now wrapped in waxed cloth and sewn into the lining of his cloak. Before dawn they rode. The journey took 5 days. Each mile stretched over hills lost to history, through villages where children no longer learned to read, through woods that murmured with the names of trees long forgotten. And finally, through mist and time, Durnhold appeared. Not as a ruin, not as a ruinous myth, but as a fortress of memory. The gates stood closed, overgrown, the towers leaned as if bowing to wind, but the stones held firm, the air smelled of old ink, oil, and something fainter, a kind of dust that only settles on books unread for 100 years. They entered. Inside, silence. Not the empty kind, but a silence inhabited. And in the deepest vault, behind a rusted door carved with the symbol of the old scribes, they found him, the archivist. He sat hunched at a desk, quill in hand, eyes clouded with age. But when he looked up, he whispered before Aelric could speak. "You're too late." Aelric stepped forward. "Too late for what?" The archivist smiled, barely a curve of his mouth. For the first time, he rasped, "Someone has found a way to erase the eraser." Then he pointed to a fireless hearth. There, beneath blackened stone, was a stack of pages half burned. And at the top, a seal Aelric recognised instantly, because it was his own, his name, his title, his entire origin story. Turning to ash, his voice caught. But the archivist only said, "Catalyst is no longer an idea. It's a hand, a blade, a mouth behind every whisper you ignored. And now it reaches for you." Aelric took the pages, salvaging what he could. He turned to Ewan. "Build a fire." "Now?" "Yes," Aelric said, his voice quiet but sharp. "We will not burn. We will remember." And so they did, not to destroy but to survive. They fed the fire with old straw and warmed the ink. They copied. They stitched. And when they left Durnhold at dusk, with smoke rising behind them, Aelric carried the only surviving proof that he had ever lived, and that someone, somewhere, was trying to end not his life, but his place in time. The road back from Durnholder was darker than when they'd come, not because of nightfall, but because of knowing. Each step the horse took seemed to echo with questions that had no clean answer. Aelric kept his hand pressed to his cloak, where the salvaged pages from the fire were sewn tightly into the lining. He hadn't yet dared to read them all. Not yet. Not out here, in the open air, where wind carried secrets too easily. Ewan rode silently beside him, his gaze ever shifting across the tree line, one hand resting near the hilt of his blade. The silence between them was not discomfort. It was a pact. For the first time, Aelric wasn't certain that returning to Westminster would bring safety. And yet, he went. They rode through rain on the third night, cold and slick. And on the fourth they passed a monastery that had once housed hundreds, now silent, windows shattered, its bell tower split down the middle like a broken tooth. By the fifth morning they reached the outskirts of the capital. But the city no longer greeted them. It stared. Guards at the gates wore different colours, not of enemy armies, but of uncertain loyalty. The seal of the king was absent. In its place, the ancient crest of the Council of Regents, a body meant only to govern in the absence of sovereign will. Aelric felt the cold slide into his bones. Something had happened. He approached the nearest gatekeeper. "What news from the palace?" The man did not meet his eyes. "The king is ill." Aelric stiffened. "Ill? He sleeps. They say he does not wake." "Since when?" The guard paused. 7 days. Aelric turned to Ewan. "We left only 9 days ago." Inside Westminster, nothing felt familiar. The corridors were swept, the halls lit, but the air was heavy with ceremony, the kind used to distract from panic. Robes fluttered faster, eyes shifted more. And as Aelric made his way toward the inner court, no herald greeted him, no one summoned him, no one even seemed to see him, as if he was already fading. He entered the royal wing. The chamberlain's door was closed, the banners drawn. At the king's door stood 4 guards he did not recognize. He offered his seal, the one bearing the symbol of his office. They did not move. "Is Lord Helric within?" No answer. "I request, no, I demand," he began. The guards opened the door, just enough for one word to reach him. From within, a voice like paper drying in the sun. "Let him enter." It was Isilde. He stepped into the room. There on the bed lay King Edward, still, pale, breath shallow as morning frost. Beside him, Isilde stood in mourning black, though no death had yet been declared. She turned to Elric with a look that carried more than sorrow, it carried warning. "He fell into sleep the day after you left," she said. "No wound, no sign of poison, just..." A whisper, then silence. "Who is ruling?" Elric asked. She hesitated. "The regents, mostly the northern lords. They moved fast, too fast." Elric moved toward the bed. Edward's face was sunken, beard unkempt, eyes half-lidded. Not dead, but not there. "It's not illness," Elric whispered. "No," Isilde said. "It's something older than that." She handed him a small bundle of cloth. Inside, a folded page. No signature, only a single sentence. "The king remembers too much." Elric felt a cold ripple through him. "It's them," he said. "Catalysts." "Yes," Isilde whispered, "and they're no longer hiding." She pulled back the sleeve of her robe and revealed a small scarred mark, the crossed quill and sword, split down the middle. "They approached me," she said, "asked for allegiance. I refused. They punished silence." Elric sat, he looked at the king, and for the first time he felt the shape of the war ahead. It would not be fought on fields, not with blades, but with erasures, with vanishings, with rewritten truths, with the slow, silent undoing of memory. "They're unmaking the record," he said, "piece by piece." Isilde nodded. "They've already begun rewriting the roles. Children born to noble houses now have no name, land grants have vanished, and soon so will the titles." Elric rose. "I need the hall." She looked at him, startled. "Now?" "Yes," he said. "Tonight." He left without waiting. Word spread fast. The Hall of Archives, the vaulted room beneath Westminster, used only for declarations of law and ceremony, had not been opened in months. Now Elric commanded it. At midnight, under torchlight, he stood alone at its centre, scrolls in hand. The Book of the Unforgotten laid bare on the altar of stone. His voice, when it rang out, did not tremble. "Let the record show," he declared to the empty hall, "that I speak not for favour nor fear, but for what must endure." And then he began to read. Name by name, line by line, every forgotten title, every erased birth, every moment he had kept hidden in ink now spoken aloud, carved into breath, so it might once again carve into memory. It was not grand, it was not poetic, it was resistance. And as the echo faded into the pillars, he knew the war had begun. And he would not fight it with a sword, he would fight it with memory. The echo of Elric's voice still clung to the walls of the archive hall, long after the doors had closed behind him. The stone had listened, the torches had flickered, and though no witnesses had stood to hear the words, something in the realm had shifted, as if the air itself had remembered. That night, he did not return to his quarters. Instead, he walked the cloisters of Westminster until dawn, tracing the familiar stones with steps that felt suddenly foreign. The kingdom he had served, the king he had followed, the truths he had preserved, all stood now on the precipice of forgetting. And somewhere in the silence between the chimes of the chapel bells, Elric realised something with painful clarity. He was no longer preserving history. He was defending it. At sunrise, he returned to the scriptorium. Dust lay thick upon the tables, and the morning light painted pale gold across rows of unused parchment. No scribes had worked here in days. Fear had taken hold, quiet, subtle, but heavy. Some had disappeared, others remained, but no longer wrote. Their silence was not reverence, it was survival. Elric took his place at the old corner table, the one he had first written upon when he was still a boy cloaked in ashen memory. He opened a new scroll and began to write. Not a ledger, not a decree, but a manifesto. The right to remember. In long looping script, he detailed the foundation of his resistance. That memory was not a luxury of the powerful, but the right of the powerless. That history must not be owned by crowns, nor buried by cloaks. That the poor, the forgotten, the discarded, they too had the right to be recorded. He called for scribes to return, for monks to unlock their libraries. for towns to copy their own chronicles. He called for memory to rise. When he finished, he signed it not with title, but with blood. A single prick from his quill's tip, drawn across the base in red, a mark that could not be replicated nor denied. Then he folded the scroll and gave it to Ewan. "Deliver this to every abbey still loyal," he said. "Then to the cities, then the ports. If they kill me, this must live." Ewan nodded once, then vanished into the light of morning. Aelric watched him go with the weight of inevitability pressing on his spine. He knew what he had just written was not merely dangerous. It was heresy in the eyes of those who believed truth was a privilege. But that belief had burned one town, one king, and countless names from the very paper that once protected them. It could burn no more. The first retaliation came within days. The Library of Redminster, ancient, vast and untouched for centuries, was set ablaze before dawn. Witnesses claimed they saw no riders, only cloaked figures moving like shadows, setting flame with no voice, no warning. Thousands of texts, gone. But not before Elric's message had reached them. One monk survived. Blinded by smoke, his hands blistered but clutched tightly to a satchel wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside were copies of land deeds, church donations, and names of hundreds buried in the fields of forgotten wars, all now protected in 3 separate bundles, sent in 3 directions. Others followed. The Abbey of Coldmere began nightly recitations of their histories, spoken aloud in the square. Farmers wrote their family names on stones and buried them in iron jars. Children began learning not just scripture, but the lineage of their people. Memory, once silent, was speaking again. And as Elric moved through Westminster, quieter now, more carefully, he began to notice small signs of resistance. A carved symbol on the edge of a market stall, an open eye. A whisper passed in the kitchens, "He is remembering for all of us." A lantern in a high tower burning through the night, the sign among scribes that a chronicler was awake and watching. But with fire comes smoke, and smoke always draws predators. One evening, as Aelric returned from a secret meeting beneath the old stone bridge behind the cathedral, he found his door ajar. No sound, no wood inside. A figure stood. She turned. Corvina, older than he remembered, or perhaps simply warier, her cloak darker, her eyes heavier, but the same strange grace, like someone who had learned to move between words instead of within them. "You shouldn't have returned," she said. "I never left," he replied. She looked at him, long and steady. "They'll kill you. They'll try." Corvina stepped forward and placed a small pouch on the table. It clinked, but not like coin. "These are names," she said. 300, erased already. I couldn't save them." Elric opened the pouch. Inside were slips of parchment, each bearing only a name and a location. No birth, no end, like ghosts written down. "They're starting with the outer provinces," she said. "By the time they reach the court, most of the realm will already be forgotten." Elric lifted his eyes. "Then we begin from the borders." He took out a fresh scroll and dipped his quill. "I'll record each name," he said, "and then I'll send it west, east, north, south. Let them copy. Let them remember." Corvina placed a hand on the table, not quite touching his. "There is one more thing," she whispered. "Marcian is not a man." He froze. "What is it then?" She exhaled slowly. "A council. 5 figures, trained as scribes, raised in exile, taught the creed of Catalyst not as theory, but as doctrine." "And they lead this?" "No," she said. "They are this." Then she looked at him deeply. "They're coming for the Book of the Unforgotten." He felt the breath leave his lungs. "How do they know?" Corvina's voice dropped. "Because you are not the only one who remembers." She turned to leave. At the door she paused. "They think they can kill memory," she said, "but they've never met someone who was born in it." And then she vanished into the dark. Elric stood alone, the pouch of names in one hand, his quill in the other. And in that moment, with the rain beginning once more outside his window, he knew. He was no longer fighting to preserve the record. He was now fighting to become it. The days that followed were ink-stained and sleepless. Elric barely left the chamber. The pouch of erased names remained at his side, each one written anew, line by line, into the growing folios of the Book of the Unforgotten. He did not decorate them. He did not arrange them by station or birth or blood. The names came as they had been lost, without order, without title, and so he restored them equally. He wrote until his fingers cramped, until the candle wicks sank into their own wax. until his vision blurred and the parchment shimmered like water. And as he wrote, the city began to hum. Something was stirring in the people. Word of the manifesto had reached the furthest ends of the realm. Peasants carried it in scraps sewn into their sleeves. Merchants etched phrases into crates. Sailors painted the open eye on the hulls of their ships. What had begun as a quiet defence was becoming a movement. They called it the memory fire, a name born in the ashes of burned monasteries, a name spoken in low tones, sometimes in fear but more often in hope, because the people, at last, were remembering themselves. But Catalyst moved too. Quicker now, sharper. The town of Breakholme awoke one morning to its entire civic archive missing, gone, not stolen, unwritten, pages left blank in their bindings, names dissolved as if soaked in time. The Church of St. Corwin, a place known for keeping meticulous marriage records dating back a century, found its ledgers intact, but the ink within them had turned to dust. And at a minor court in the south, a nobleman presented a land deed. No one could verify it, because the estate it referenced, Greyholt on Dun, no longer existed in any map. It had been erased from not only paper, but from speech, from memory, from the living. No one could recall it, not even Aelric. He tore apart his older ledgers, his earliest copies. Nothing. It was the first time he felt true fear, not of death, but of absence, of something once real, now vanished not by fire or war, but by silence. He went to the old crypt beneath the abbey, where some of the oldest scrolls in the realm were entombed in glass and iron. The place was guarded by monks sworn to silence, untouched by court or creed. He asked to see the royal census of the year 823, one of the earliest preserved records. The monks led him in. They unlocked the case, and within blank parchment, untouched, unaged, perfectly preserved, empty, they looked at him with solemn, hollow stares. "We never opened it," one whispered. "But it was full, once." Aelric staggered back. Catalyst had reached deeper than he imagined. Not just present record, not just current memory. They were rewriting off. And if that were possible, then no history was safe. That night, he summoned every remaining loyal chronicler, librarian, abbot and scribe to a meet deep beneath Westminster in the old council chamber, long abandoned since the years of plague. They came quietly, not in procession, not in force, but they came. And when the torches were lit, Aelric stood before them and unrolled the page from Durnhold, the half-burnt list of his own beginnings, his name, his birth, the orphanage, the abbey, proof that even he was no longer immune. "They are not targeting kings," he said, "nor warriors, nor coins. They are targeting meaning." He held up a single slip from Corvina's pouch. "A world without memory is a world without loyalty, without justice, without truth, without us." He let the words echo, then he unrolled a map. Dozens of marks traced across it, burned archives, vanished churches, cities where names had begun to fade even from grave markers. "We are losing ground," he said. "Not in miles, but in minds." He pointed to the four corners of the realm. "We must ignite the memory fire, not with torches, but with copying, with reading aloud, with remembering together." The abbots nodded, the scribes bowed, and the vow was taken that no name would be written once, but 1,000 times, that no record would exist in one place but in many, and that no truth would be spoken only by the powerful, but carried by the people. From that night on, Westminster became something it had never been, a citadel of remembrance. Messages were dispatched, each bearing the eye of the memory fire. Abbeys once passive became centres of copying. Millers taught their children the genealogies of their grandparents. Blacksmiths carved old lines of poetry into their anvils. History became a living act. And as the realm began to remember, Catalyst struck again. A ship arrived in harbour. Its flag bore no kingdom. Its crew, silent, no cargo, no coin. But within the hold, scrolls. Blank scrolls, thousands of them, each stamped with the seal of a library that had never existed. On each scroll, a message written in a language no scholar could identify. Only Aelric recognised the structure. It was an inversion of the royal script, mirrored, reversed, and when he read it aloud by candlelight, the ink began to vanish, not just on the scroll, but from the books around him. He slammed the scroll shut. But 3 names were already gone from the pages beside him, 3 names he had memorised, gone from the page, gone from his mind. He stood in terror, because now Catalyst had crossed the final threshold. They no longer burned, they no longer erased. They had begun to undo the memory within the living. And Elric, the boy who had once watched the monks from behind a stable wall, the man who had risen from silence to speak for kings, now stood at the edge of something deeper than war. This was not about rule, not about rebellion. It was about the right to exist in the memory of others, and they were erasing that right, one name at a time. The morning after the scroll incident, Elric sat by the window of his private chamber, unmoving. The Book of the Unforgotten lay open on the table beside him, yet he could not bring himself to touch it. He stared at the empty page, once filled with names he knew by heart, and now hollow as though the parchment had swallowed its own memory. He whispered aloud, testing himself. Elric of Harrowfield. Nothing. Tomlin, son of Garad. Nothing. He closed his eyes and forced the faces forward, but they would not come. Not even a shadow of recollection. They had not only been erased, they had been unmade. This was the new weapon of Catalyst. Not fire, not blade, but forgetting from within. Elric stood slowly, his breath shallow, the weight of absence heavier than death. He understood now. If they could steal names from him, the one who remembered everything, then no memory was safe, not even in the living mind. He descended into the old vault of Westminster that morning alone and opened the deepest of the sealed archives, where the names of the excommunicated, the exiled, and the dead were kept in red-inked scrolls. He needed something older than ink, older than written word. He needed spoken truth. There, bound in horsehide and stitched with sinew, was the Codex Veritas, a forbidden manuscript compiled over 200 years prior, long buried and condemned. Within its cracked pages were the names of songs once banned, of oral traditions once outlawed by kings who feared the power of memory without paper. He spent the entire day and night reading it aloud. Every page, every name, every rhythm passed down through voice. The echoes rose into the cold stones of the vault and etched themselves deeper than ink could ever reach. The next morning he gave an order that startled even his most loyal followers. From this day forward, every name shall be spoken, sung, and remembered by voice, not ink alone. He sent riders to the four corners of the realm, not with scrolls, but with chants, songs and recitations. He told the abbots to gather children in courtyards and teach them the cadence of the remembered, a steady, rhythmic listing of the names of those lost to Catalyst, passed from tongue to tongue like old hymns once sung in the hills. And the people responded. In villages where parchment could not reach, they learned to chant their bloodlines. In mountain towns, elders began whispering histories by firelight. In coastal hamlets, fishermen carved names into oars, repeating them with each stroke. And in the city, beneath the grand arches of the archive hall, hundreds gathered every seventh night, where Elric himself led the litany of memory. He spoke not like king or scribe, but like one whose every word fought against the dark. Each name spoken became a flame. Each voice raised became a wall, and soon the forgetting slowed. Catalyst felt it. The erasures began to fail. Towns previously silenced began speaking again. Scrolls once blank refused to accept the ink of lies. Memory was hardening, not against loss, but against deletion. But then, on the 13th night of remembrance, they struck harder than ever before. The Tower of Hollowlight, a monastery perched on the cliffs of the northern sea, was raised not by fire, but by silence. A passing merchant ship saw it from the water. Every monk inside stood at the edge of the cliff in still formation, eyes open, mouths unmoving, until each one stepped into the abyss together. They left behind only a single carved tablet, standing upright in the centre of the ruined nave. It read, "When the past becomes burden, the present must be lightened." Catalyst had moved from erasing records to convincing minds that memory itself was a sin. That remembering was cruelty. That forgetting was freedom. Elric knelt before the tablet the next day. He said nothing. He did not weep. But he placed the Book of the Unforgotten upon the stone and made a vow to the fallen. "You chose silence, I choose speech. You stepped from the cliff. I will stand at its edge and shout until the end." And from that day forward, he added no more to the book by hand. He let the people write it now. Each town began creating its own chapter. Some scratched into clay, some carved into walls, some sang into caves where echoes lived longer than paper. Elric's message was simple. Let no record live in one place. Let no name rest in only one heart. Scatter the memory, and they cannot take it. He trained others, not just scribes, but memory keepers. Ordinary men and women taught to memorize entire ledgers by rhythm and tone. They could recite 10 generations by breath alone. If one fell, another would carry the line. And slowly, the war changed. Catalyst still struck. But now the silence it sowed was met with voices. It burned churches, but the names were already on wind and water, erased scrolls. But the stories lived in children who knew nothing else. And then, in the 23rd week of the memory fire, a name returned. Not by ink, not by Elric, but from a girl in a stone village, high in the hills of Caerwyn. She sang it while spinning thread. A lullaby her mother had taught her, a song of Elric of Harrowfield. The name Elric had lost, the name he thought gone. It returned in melody, whole, intact. He rode to the village within the week, sat beside the girl, listened to her sing. And when she finished, he wept for the first time in 20 years. Not from grief, from proof. Proof that memory was not his alone to carry. That truth could be lost and still return. That Catalyst had underestimated the oldest power of all, the voice that refuses to forget. The wind had changed, not just in the hills or valleys, but in the soul of the realm itself. You could hear it in the way market squares hummed with half-remembered songs, in the way children spoke the names of ancestors as if they were still among them, in the way the silence Catalyst once sowed now met resistance, not with swords, but with syllables. Memory had become rebellion, and Elric had become its quiet leader. He no longer needed to walk the halls of Westminster draped in title. The scribes called him the First Quill. The villagers simply called him the Rememberer. And while the regents in the royal court debated taxes and borders, it was Elric whom the people followed. But with reverence came danger. One evening, as twilight spilled gold across the spires, a sealed note arrived. No wax, no crest, just folded vellum worn at the corners. It read, "They will not strike you. They will strike what you love." There was no signature, but Elric recognised the hand, Corvina. He stared at the note in silence, then walked to the window of his chamber. The sun had dipped below the skyline, and the city below began to glitter with torchlight. For a moment, everything seemed quiet, safe. But he knew better. Catalyst had grown bolder in failure, and now it would stop trying to erase him. It would go after those who had never chosen to resist, those who had merely chosen to remember. He summoned Ewan. "They'll go after the memory keepers," Elric said. Ewan nodded. "Then we bring them here." "No," Elric whispered. "We scatter them further." He unrolled a map, dozens of small villages, towns and waypoints marked with faded ink. He circled 10. "New cells," he said, "disguised as shepherds, masons, traders. Each one tasked not with preservation, but propagation." "And if they're found?" "They won't be," Elric replied, "because they won't write anything." He paused. "They'll become the books." Each keeper would memorize their chapter, speak it, teach it, bury it in the minds of others until it became impossible to know where the memory ended and the person began. Memory would cease to be a possession. It would become a condition. In the weeks that followed, the keepers departed under cover of fog, each with a final word and a single object to pass their identity. A piece of cloth embroidered with the open eye. That same symbol began to appear across the realm, chalked onto doorframes, etched into river stones, stitched into cloaks. No one admitted to drawing it, no one explained it, but it spread like breath. And then came the night of hollow names. 12 villages, scattered across the kingdom, awoke to find their graveyards emptied. Not of bodies, but of inscriptions, every stone, every wooden cross, every carved name, erased, as if the chisel itself had never touched the surface. Even the oldest graves, ones no living soul could recall, were blank. Elric rode to one such village the next morning. The people stood in silence. Not mourning, something else, something deeper, as though the roots of their identity had been lifted from the earth and carried away by an unseen wind. Elric stood before the graveyard and took a deep breath. Then he began to speak, one name at a time. He did not know them, had never seen the inscriptions, but he spoke anyway. "Here lies Alwyn of the Red Moor, fisherman, father of 3. Here lies Thyra of Glenbrook, midwife, buried with her silver ring." He filled the silence not with truth, but with intent. because sometimes even invented memory was stronger than none at all. And as he spoke, the people began to add their own names, their own fragments of story. The graves did not reclaim their carvings, but something else returned, a feeling, a shape, a resistance. Later that night, as Elric sat by the hearth in the village longhouse, an old woman approached him. She pressed a folded cloth into his palm. "I remembered my mother's name again," she said softly. "Not from a book, from the sound of it." Elric opened the cloth. It was embroidered with 3 words, "Let us be spoken." He closed his eyes and nodded. That week, he wrote no new pages. Instead, he travelled, from town to town, village to village, speaking names aloud, letting others add to the chain of remembering. He carried no seal, wore no crest, only his voice. And still, Catullus hunted him. Once, an assassin came in the shape of a beggar, once in the robes of a monk. Another time, it was not a person at all, but a book, an anonymous gift that, when opened, released a black dust that stole his voice for 3 days. But each time, he survived. Not by steel, but by the people. They hid him, protected him, shielded him in barns and chapels and fields, because by now they understood. To keep Elric alive was to keep themselves known. And then, in the 17th season of his resistance, a rider came from the coast with a message wrapped in oilskin. It bore the sigil of Catullus. But the message was not a threat. It was an invitation, a meeting, a truce, a single line. "Come to the nameless hall. Bring no books. Bring no names." Elric stared at the message for a long time. Ewan, now older and grey at the temples, watched him carefully. "Will you go?" he asked. Elric answered with only one word. "Yes," because he knew now. The war of forgetting could not be won by hiding. It had to be met, face to face, at the place where silence was born. The journey to the nameless hall began in mist. Elric departed without fanfare, without escort, and without cloak or crest. Only a plain tunic, his walking staff, and the worn satchel that had once held the Book of the Unforgotten. Now that satchel held nothing. He brought no documents, no scrolls, no names. He brought only himself. The road stretched long and empty, as though the land itself had been stripped bare of memory. Villages thinned. The sky remained grey for days. The birdsong disappeared, replaced by a hush that deepened with every mile. By the 6th evening, he entered a narrow pass between 2 hills where no trees grew and no paths forked. A single stone pillar stood at its centre, worn smooth by time. No inscription remained, only a groove where a name had once been. This was the border. Beyond it lay the dominion of Catullus. Ewan had offered to follow in secret, to remain just out of sight. But Elric had refused, not out of pride, but because some battles could not be protected against, only faced. He walked on. At dawn of the 8th day, the nameless hall appeared. Not a fortress, not a ruin, something stranger. A vast structure of low black stone, buried partially into the earth like a wound too deep to close. No banners flew, no guards waited, just an open archway that led into shadow. Elric passed beneath it. Inside, the hall was cold, its ceiling curved like the inside of a ribcage. Then, along its walls stood figures robed in slate-grey cloth, their faces veiled, hands folded. None spoke, none moved. But at the far end of the chamber stood a single table of pale stone, 5 chairs, 4 were occupied. The 5th at the centre waited. He approached. No words were exchanged as he sat. Then a voice rose, not loud, but everywhere, genderless, timeless. "You come as asked. I come as warned," Elric replied. The speaker did not smile. None of them did. "You have made yourself a barrier," they said, "a fence around what was meant to dissolve." "I have remembered what was meant to live," Elric said. "Names are burdens," the figure to the left spoke. "They are the roots of war, of shame, of bloodlines better left to dust." "To forget is mercy," said another. "To unmake is peace." Elric looked at them. Peace for whom? For the future, the 5th finally spoke. For what must come after the tangle of memory is burned away. Elric remained still. "What is this place?" he asked softly. "This hall." "It is the beginning," one answered. "And the end," said another. Elric let silence stretch between them. "You believe memory to be a weapon," he said. "But it is not. It is a shelter, a compass, the only light we carry forward when fire dies." The one at the centre leaned forward. Their hands, pale, long-fingered, rested on the stone. "You were a boy without a name," the voice said. "You should have vanished like the rest, yet you clung. Why?" "Because even shadows remember the light," Elric answered. The 5 figures seemed to still further. You resist the forgetting, one said, but you cannot resist the will to forget. It is within them all, the people, the kings, even the scribes. You saw it in the monks at Hollow Light. They stepped into silence gladly. They were broken, Elric whispered. You offered them peace, but you gave them void. The centre voice replied, better the void than the weight. Elric reached slowly into his tunic. The veiled figures stirred, but he withdrew only a single item, a child's carved whistle. Simple, ash wood, cracked at the mouthpiece. I found this in a graveyard near Serwyn, he said. It belonged to a boy named Lyndon. No scroll ever bore his name, no record listed him, but his sister remembered. She taught it to her daughter, and she taught it to hers. He placed the whistle on the stone table. It's all that remains of him, but it's enough. The chamber was silent. Then the central figure spoke again. If we erase you, they said, what remains? Elric looked at them. Too late, he leaned forward. I've already been spoken, and once a word is spoken, it echoes. The fifth figure stood. You are one man. No, Elric said calmly, I'm a memory now, and memories do not die, they spread. The figure stared at him. Their silence was not hesitation, it was calculation. And then softly, we could still unmake you. Elric nodded. You can try. He stood. Erase me. But the child in the hills who hums her grandmother's tune will remember. The stonemason who etched names into his tools will remember. The blind monk who listens to his abbey read the litany of the forgotten every dusk will remember. He turned from the table. And when they say my name even once, I return! He walked toward the exit. No one stopped him. And as he stepped into the daylight, something passed behind his shoulders. Not a wind, but a feeling, like a name trying and failing to be erased. And he knew they feared him now, not because of what he was, but because of what he had become. A voice that outlived silence, a shape that memory could not release. And so as he made his way down the long stony path away from the nameless hall, he did not carry scrolls. He carried nothing, except the echo of what they could no longer kill, the sound of someone remembering. When Elric returned to Westminster, the bells did not ring. No procession awaited him. The gates opened with a groan, and the guards stepped aside in silence. Yet somehow, the stillness felt louder than a welcome. Word of his journey to the nameless hall had arrived before he had. But the silence was not dread, it was reverence. He crossed the courtyard alone, though eyes followed him from every archway and shadowed corridor. The memory fire had not dimmed in his absence. It had spread. Children now chalked names across cobblestones. Old women murmured family lines in prayer. Even the palace scribes, once ordered to cease their copying, had returned to their benches, not by command, by choice, by belief. When Elric entered the great library, he found the old place transformed. The long hall, once darkened by fear, was now alive with torchlight. Scrolls, letters, ledgers, all being read aloud by groups of villagers, monks, scribes, and even former soldiers, some barely literate, some reciting from heart. They were not preserving records, they were inhabiting them. Elric stood there, unmoving, his heart catching in his chest. He had built no army, wielded no sword, but here it was, the defence he had dreamed of, not with walls, but with memory. Isolde appeared beside him. She did not speak. She only pressed a folded parchment into his palm. He opened it slowly. It was a list. Names. And at the bottom, written in her careful hand, these are the ones who returned, the ones thought lost, erased, forgotten, now remembered, not by finding scrolls, but through song, story, fragments rediscovered in the margins of other lives. He recognised one, Tomlin, son of Garrod. The name he had lost. He closed his eyes. For a single moment he allowed himself to something other than vigilance, hope. But it didn't last long. That evening, a raven arrived from the eastern coast. Its legs bore no seal, just a tightly wrapped piece of threadbare parchment. Inside 3 words, the Ashwater Pact. Elric frowned. The name was ancient, obscure, but not unfamiliar. It had once appeared in a charter he'd read deep in the forbidden archives of Durnhold. A pact sworn between rival kingdoms during a time of drought and darkness, meant to unify voices when kingdoms failed to do so. It had not been seen in generations. He summoned Ewan and Isolde to the old war chamber. The Ashwater Pact is being revived, Elric said, laying out the message on the oak table, but not by kings, by memory keepers, from the outer territories, from places Catalyst thought they had silenced. Isolde leaned in. What do they want? Elric looked between them. Nothing less than a memory alliance, across languages, across borders, a united front of those who choose to remember. Ewan frowned. That means exposing the fire. It means sharing it, Elric replied. We're no longer defending a kingdom's record, we're preserving humanity's. He drafted 12 letters that night, each one handwritten, bearing no crest, and sealed not with wax, but with a small strip of burned linen, the symbol of a memory that had survived flame. They were sent by rider, ship, and even whispered to 2 travelling bards. Each one carried the same offer. Lend your voices, speak your names. We will echo them until the end. Weeks passed. Responses trickled in. A monastery in the highlands sent a song. A village in the desert sent a carved stone. A city across the sea returned a scroll written in 4 languages, each one listing the same 30 names. The Ashra Pact was real, and it was growing. Catalyst responded with venom. A great storm struck the southern ports where the memory fire was strongest. Ships sank. Archives vanished beneath the tide. Yet the people stood on the docks and recited names into the wind, as if willing the sea to remember. In the capital of Renmar, 5 entire generations were struck from the civic register overnight. When the town clerk awoke, he found only a single word scrawled across his desk in black ash. Begin again. And he did, by reciting every name he could remember, aloud, one, by candlelight. Catalyst's strength was still terrifying, but it was no longer absolute. They had taught the world to forget, but Elric had taught it to resist. And then, one night, a letter arrived unlike any other. No ink, no paper, just a child, no older than 10, brought to Westminster by a travelling herbalist. The child carried only a piece of string, tied into a single knot. When Elric asked what it meant, the child looked up and said, "It's my grandfather's name." No one had taught her to read, no one had written it down, but someone had tied that string, and someone had passed the meaning down, and now she remembered. Elric felt a shiver pass through him. Catalyst would never understand, because they thought names were fragile, easy to erase. But they were wrong, because names were not just letters, they were acts. They were connections, they were living, and now even a knot in a string could carry a life forward. So Elric wrote once more, not in a book, not in a ledger, but carved into a stone wall in the heart of the Grand Library. You may unwrite the words, but not the will behind them. We are not keepers of memory. We are memory, and memory, once away, cannot be put back to sleep. The winter that followed was the coldest in a generation. Frost clung to every ledge in Westminster like the fingers of forgotten ghosts. Rivers froze in stillness. Bells rang dull and low, yet in the heart of the realm, the fire did not dim, it spread. By now, the Ashwater Pact had taken root across lands once thorn-reachable, from the high crags of the eastern cliffs to the salt-washed borders of the southern marshes. People were remembering not only names, but ways. They revived forgotten rituals, reburied erased graves, sang old laments in dialects not heard in 100 years. Where Catalyst erased with silence, the Pact responded with remembrance, and it was working. Elric stood before a wall of the great library, where each stone now bore a name carved by hand, some crooked, some crude, some nearly illegible, but none forgotten. The walls stretched higher each day. New names etched in by those who travelled from all corners of the realm to contribute just one. He placed his palm against the cold stone and whispered, "Tomlin, son of Garrod." It still echoed there, faint but eternal. Behind him the doors creaked open. Ewan entered quietly, shaking snow from his shoulders. "They've moved again," Ewan said. "Catalyst." Elric turned. "We're west. The Black Monastery. Its entire order is gone. Not dead. Just emptied. The scribes are there. The books are there, but none of them can say who they are or why they were ever there at all." Elric's jaw tightened. "They're hollowing the living now," Ewan nodded. "There's more. They've sent another message. A challenge." Elric took the scroll. This one was different. No threats, no riddles, only a proposal. Let us decide it in one place, one final memory, one last name. And beneath it, return to where you began. The stable behind the old inn, where his mother had died, where the world first forgot he existed. "It's a trap," Ewan said. "You know that." "Yes," Elric whispered. "But if I don't go, something greater than me will be forgotten." Ewan said nothing. He only clasped Elric's shoulder once and nodded. Preparations were made in silence. Elric refused escort. This time he went alone, as he had so many years ago, not to write history, but to meet it. The road south was familiar and foreign all at once. The landscape had changed, yet every bend of the path still echoed with boyhood memory. The whisper of reeds by the river, the call of crows over fallow fields, and then, at the edge of a ruined village, he found it. The inn, long since collapsed. The stones covered in moss, the stable barely standing, slouched to one side like a dying man refusing to lie down. Elric dismounted and approached. There was no sign of Catalyst, no figures, no cloaks, no voice, only a flickering lantern hung upon a nail where the stable door once swung. He stepped inside. Dust, straw, the smell of rot and memory, and there in the centre sat a child, a boy no older than 10, wrapped in a threadbare cloak, eyes too old for his face. Elric knelt. "Do you know where you are?" The boy nodded slowly. Where the name stopped. Elric looked closer. This child, he was no stranger, he was familiar, not in face but in presence. "What is your name?" Elric asked gently. The boy looked down. "I don't remember," he said. "They said I never had one." Elric's breath caught. This was not a trap, it was a test. He reached into his satchel, not for a scroll, not for ink, for a stone, small, smooth, with one word etched into it. He placed it in the boy's hand. "Leora." "It doesn't matter what they told you," Elric said. "You don't need a past to begin again, you only need a name and someone to say it." The boy looked at the stone. "Is it mine?" "If you speak it," Elric whispered, "then it becomes real." The boy clutched it tightly, and he whispered, "Leora." The lantern flickered once, and the presence in the room shifted, something ancient, watching, waiting. Then from the rafters above came a sound, soft, slow, a name spoken back, "Leora." Then again, from outside, "Leora," from the trees, from the wind, as if the world once silent was repeating it, remembering. Elric stood, heart trembling. He had not fought Catalyst with weapons. He had fought it by giving back what it took, one name at a time. And now, even the nameless had a place. The boy looked up at him. His eyes were different now, no longer vacant, no longer erased. "I remember something," the boy said. "What?" The boy smiled. "My mother used to sing." Elric closed his eyes, not in grief, in victory, because even if Catalyst returned again, stronger, crueler, more cunning, it had failed in the one way that mattered most. It had not broken the chain. And the chain would grow, as long as someone remembered, as long as someone spoke. When Elric returned from the stable, the air of Westminster felt different. Not colder, not warmer, but charged, like the breath before lightning. The memory fire, once a movement, had become a force. It no longer needed to spread. It was simply there, rooted in the fabric of daily life. And still, Catalyst watched. Their silence was no longer absence, it was pressure, a hand resting gently at the edge of the throat. Elric walked through the library halls and saw the changes he'd once only dreamed of. Children sitting cross-legged beside old monks reciting bloodlines like poetry, stone cutters shaping names into bricks, street performers weaving folk tales once thought lost into their songs. Even the walls breathed memory. But one name haunted him now.
Leora!
The boy from the stable had remained behind, safe with one of the travelling scribes. But the name, the act of giving it, had done more than restore a child. It had awoken something else. That night, Elric dreamt. He stood at the edge of a great field, but the field was not made of grass, it was made of voices. Thousands of them, whispering, weeping, singing, laughing, calling out names, some familiar, most forgotten. And above them in the sky, a single eye burned, not watching him but recording him, etching his every breath into the cosmos. He awoke before dawn, sweat freezing against his skin. Ewan waited outside his chamber, cloak already fastened. "They sent word," Ewan said, "from Sailwyn." Elric's brow tightened. "What is it?" "They found a vault. Old, sealed since the 3rd dynasty. There's something inside. Something alive." Within hours, Elric and Ewan rode south. The wind howled across the barren hills, whipping snow across the trail. The further they travelled, the quieter the land became. Fewer towns, fewer signs of life. Only names carved into trees and stones, left behind like breadcrumbs in the wilderness. By the 3rd day they arrived. The vault was half buried in the cliffs, its entrance a narrow crack of obsidian black stone, outlined with faded runes no one could read. Around it, memory keepers stood with torches, their eyes solemn. It opened on its own, one whispered, after the child said her name. Elric stepped inside. The passage narrowed, then widened into a chamber not built by hand but carved by purpose. The walls were polished smooth, mirror-like, and upon them danced images. Not etched, not drawn, moving. Living memories, a mother lifting her child, a man placing his hand on a book, a girl tying a knot of string. Elric stood breathless. These were not archives. These were imprints, traces of memory preserved not in ink or voice, but in intention. Actions repeated so purely that the stone itself had remembered. In the centre of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it a box. Plain. Wooden. Old as breath itself. He stepped forward and opened it. Inside, a single piece of parchment, not written, not painted. Singed. Its edges curled, but at its centre a word remained burned into the grain. Amarin. Not a name he recognised, but his lips parted, and he spoke it aloud. The walls trembled, not violently, but with reverence. Like a cathedral hearing its first prayer in centuries, then a voice. Not from behind him, not from within him, from everywhere. One name opens the gate. Elric's skin prickled. What gate? The voice answered with silence. But the answer had already been given in the shape of that child's in the awakening of this place, in the living fire of a movement that had become more than rebellion. It had become a key. Back in Westminster, Aelric stood before the Council of Stewards, those few who had stayed loyal, and those who had turned and now returned. They asked him only one question. What do we do next? And Aelric, still holding the parchment-bearing Amarin, answered softly. We stop defending memory. The council frowned. Then what do we do? We restore it, he said. Every name they stole, every moment they unmade, we bring it back, not just to parchment, not just to speech, but to the very bones of the world. He turned and pointed to the great map upon the wall, the old kingdom ringed in fire. This realm is not lines, not crowns, not wars. It is stories, people, and we will not let it be rewritten by silence. A voice spoke from the corner. Isolde. What is Amarin? She asked. Aelric looked down at the singed parchment. I don't know, he admitted, but it's a name, and every name is a beginning, and thus began the next phase. Not war, not resistance, but retrieval. Memory keepers began searching not only for what was lost, but for what was waiting to be remembered. Names that had never been recorded, stories that had died before being told, voices from before kingdoms rose. And with each rediscovered name, the vaults across the realm began to awaken, not just Caelwyn, but in the mountains, in the drowned valleys, in the ruins of cathedrals long since reclaimed by moss and shadow, each with a box with a name, each waiting, as if the world itself had prepared for Catalyst and had chosen Aelric to answer. Winter melted reluctantly into spring. Snow retreated from the high stones, leaving behind fields saturated with memory. Not metaphor, not poetry, real memory. Stories whispered into the thawed earth by hands that refused to forget. Each hill had a name again. Each stream carried the echoes of something spoken. And in the centre of it all stood Aelric, no longer only a scribe. He had become something else. A guide, a vessel, a living threshold between the world that had been and the world still fighting to exist. In the weeks following the discovery at Selwyn, more vaults opened, not with force, not by digging, but by names, spoken in the right place, by the right person, with the right weight of truth behind them. Names that hadn't existed in any written record, yet somehow unlocked ancient stone and lit dormant chambers with warmth that wasn't fire. In the marshlands of Telra, a blind woman recited a lullaby, remembered only through humming, and a wall cracked open, revealing tablets sealed in wax, each one marked with the same sigil, the open eye. In the high cliffs of Derowin, a shepherd carved his grandam into the bark of a dead tree, and the mountain beneath his feet trembled, revealing a stair carved into stone no man had touched in 200 years. Each vault bore names, not famous, not royal, just real. Bakers, sailors, midwives, lost children, each sealed in silence until someone somewhere remembered them enough to speak them again. Catalyst could not stop them. It tried. Black scrolls returned, this time written in the language of absence. Whole chapters disappeared from books in the night. In the city of Hearthmere, a statue that had stood for 3 centuries cracked and fell, not from time but from forgetting. The people woke and could not even name who it was meant to honour. And yet, for every loss, 3 memories returned, because the people were no longer afraid. The people had begun to right themselves. In firelit halls, entire villages now gathered weekly, not to eat or barter, but to recite. Lineages, birthplaces, first kisses, old rivalries, names of rivers before the maps changed. These things were spoken, sung, carved, passed from palm to palm in tokens and stones. And Elric, he listened. He no longer recorded with ink. He carried. Wherever he walked, people gathered. Not to be told what to remember, but to offer it. They pressed stories into his hands like food to the starving. A mother whispered of her son who died before his name was blessed. A girl carried the embroidered sleeve of a woman no one else remembered. An old soldier recited the names of every man who had stood beside him in the northern snows and never returned. Elric took them all. He did not write them. He became them. He would wake in the middle of the night, murmuring names he'd never heard in life, dreaming of faces he had never seen. Not nightmares, presences. He no longer questioned it. He only honoured it. But something deeper stirred. The parchment bearing the name Amarin, singed and ancient, would not rest. Wherever Elric placed it, vault, box, stone shelf, it returned to his hand by morning. Always warm to the touch, always pulsing with a gentle weight, as though the name itself was calling. And then, one night, it spoke. Not aloud, not in a voice, but in a pull. Elric rose before dawn and rode west, alone. He told no one where, only that he was following a name. For 3 days he rode through empty hills, through lands no longer claimed by noble house or banner. Then, at the edge of the known realm, where mist clung to jagged stone and the sea moaned like a forgotten beast, he stopped. There stood a single arch of stone, broken, worn, nothing beyond it but ocean except the name. Etched, faint and flickering, into the base of the arch, Amarin. He stepped beneath it, the world changed, the sky stilled, the wind vanished, and before him stretched a path of silver water leading into mist, wide enough for one man to walk, edged with floating lanterns that bore no flame. He walked. With every step he remembered, not his own life, other lives. A birth in a sun-warmed cottage. A death on a battlefield no one marked, a hand that once held a wooden whistle beside a hearth. He kept walking. At the end of the path, he found a mirror, not of glass, of still water, black as ink. And when he looked down, he did not see his own face. He saw hundreds, thousands, all the names he had ever spoken, all the memories he had ever carried, all of them, looking back. Elric fell to his knees, not in fear, in understanding. This was not a destination. This was the centre of remembrance, where all names came when they were spoken with love, where forgotten things waited not to be found, but to be invited back. He reached into the satchel and drew the parchment. The name still burned there, Amarin. And this time he did not say it loud. He gave it away. He released it into the mirror, and the water rippled, the faces shimmered, and from the deep a voice returned, ancient, soft, no louder than a heartbeat. You remember. Therefore we remain. Elric closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was lying in the grass beside the arch, beneath a starlit sky. The parchment was gone, but the name remained inside him, and from that day forward he no longer carried the book of the unforgotten, because now he was the book, and the world had just begun to read. Spring unfurled slowly like an old man rising from sleep. The land breathed deep, rivers overflowing with the melt of memory. Wildflowers bloomed where ashes had fallen the year before, and across the realm, in churches, fields and open halls, people spoke. They did not chant Elric's name. They did not even always remember his face, but they remembered what he taught them. That a name is not ink. That memory is not paper. That truth, once spoken with love, can outlive even silence. In the north, a widow recited the names of her lost family each morning to a stone wall and swore the birds sang them back. In the east, fishermen painted names along their sails and claimed the winds carried them farther. In the deep southern valleys, children played games by reciting the oldest names they knew, each syllable an offering, a link in an unbroken chain. The memory fire no longer burned. It glowed. Quiet, warm, steady. And then, one morning without warning, the eye returned. Not carved, not painted, not sewn, in the sky. A stormless, soundless eclipse. The clouds bent in a perfect circle. Not darkness, but stillness. Every bird stopped flying, every leaf froze mid-sway, and above, for one breathless moment, the symbol burned into the heavens, a single unblinking eye. Elric stood atop the western tower of Westminster, watching. "They know," he whispered. Behind him, Ewan stepped into view, slower now, older than the man who once followed Elric into the dead cities. "They always knew," Ewan said. "What do we do?" Ewan offered the smallest smile. "What we've always done." Below, the bells of the great library began to ring. 1, 2, 3 times, then silence. A signal passed down from the upper halls. Someone had found another vault. This one deep beneath the earth, under a ruined cathedral swallowed long ago by swamp and flood. It had only surfaced when the marsh receded. Elric descended into the darkness 3 days later, torchlight flickering behind him, heart steady. The walls of the vault were unlike any before. Not stone, bone, pressed, carved, stacked. Human bones, thousands of them. And on each a single word, not names. Titles: thief, bastard, witch, coward, illegitimate. Elric froze. Ewan's torch caught the gleam of the ceiling. It bore an inscription written in gold dust and blood. "We forget to save ourselves." Catalyst had not always been lies. Once, long ago, it had begun as something else, a mercy, a way to remove shame from the record, to cleanse pain by erasing it, to allow the broken to rest, unnamed and free. Not all forgetting had been cruelty. Some had been born from love, but over time it had become control. Elric stepped forward, running his hand along the wall. "I understand," he whispered. He closed his eyes. "Not to erase, to remember." And then he named them. One by one. Not their slurs, not their titles, their truths. He gave the thief her childhood back. He gave the coward his moment of bravery. He gave the witch her healing hands, her firelight. He gave the bastard a lineage spoken with honour, and with every name, a breath. The bones shivered, not crumbled, shifted, as if the very memory of injustice had been waiting to be rewritten, not by new stories, but by wholeness, by completion. Elric emerged from the vault pale, sweat-soaked, eyes bright with exhaustion. He did not speak for 2 days. When he finally did, he called a gathering in the courtyard of the Grand Library. Thousands came, no banners, no horns, just quiet, expectant. He stepped forward. No robes, no crown, no book, only voice. "I have seen the foundation of Catalyst," he said, "and it was not evil." The crowd murmured. "It was made to let pain pass. But forgetting does not heal, it buries. And what is buried rises again, stranger and sharper than before." He paused. "We must not only remember the good, we must remember the whole, the shame, the sorrow, the broken things, not to hold them in anger, but to forgive them properly." He raised his eyes. "That is what they fear now, not our voices, not our chants. They fear our compassion." He let silence settle over them. Then, for the first time in many months, he opened a scroll. This one bore no name, just a list of wrongs, falsely accused, forgotten crimes, unspoken loves, abandoned children. He read every line aloud, and when he finished, he spoke 5 words that burned into the hearts of all who listened. "Let no story die alone." That night, candles were lit in every window across the realm, not for celebration, not for mourning, but for witness. Catalyst, for the first time, did not respond. The sky remained clear, the eye did not return. But Elric knew this was not an ending. The deeper vaults were still sealed, the oldest names still hidden, and the true memory of the world was still sleeping beneath them. But now, it was stirring. By early summer, the realm had begun to feel its heartbeat again. Not the shallow political rhythm of titles and treaties, but the deep ancestral thrum of truth remembered. Fields once stripped of name now bore markers carved by hand. Rivers ran with stories, passed mouth to mouth by those who no longer feared speaking aloud. And in every village, someone, old, young, once silent, was now telling. The memory fire had become not a rebellion, but a restoration. But Elric knew what still lay beneath it. He sat alone one morning beneath the willow at the edge of the southern wall of Westminster. The branches trailed low as if listening. In his lap rested no book, no scroll, only a single piece of slate on which he had drawn the outline of a circle. The eye. But this one was broken. A crack ran through it, jagged like a wound that refused to seal. "They've stopped striking," Ewan said as he approached. "Not a single erasure in 3 weeks." Elric nodded, not lifting his gaze. "That isn't mercy, it's waiting." Ewan lowered himself to the grass. "For what? For us to become satisfied, to believe we've won." He pointed to the broken eye, but a silence that waits is worse than one that strikes. He turned the slate toward Ewan. I want you to gather the keepers, all of them, and I want them to begin preparing something we've never dared." Ewan's brow furrowed. "What?" Elric looked to the horizon. "The first name!" The words rang out like thunder in Ewan's chest, not because they were loud, but because they were impossible. The first name, the original memory, the seed from which all speech, all knowledge had grown. Legend said it had been spoken once, and then buried, divided, lost in time. "Do you believe it's real?" Ewan asked, voice low. Elric stood. "I believe it's not meant to be found. It's meant to be reassembled." He stepped forward, voice sharpening. "We've collected the broken stories, we've relit the fire, but if we do not anchor memory, it will drift again. The first name is not a weapon, it's the root, the name of names, the word that remembers the world." That night, the 12 memory keepers were summoned. They came from across the realm, some on foot, some on horseback, some from across seas. None of them spoke loudly. They did not dress in gold or robes. They bore no titles, but each one had once preserved a part of history when no one else dared. Elric met them in the lower chamber of the Grand Library, where the walls had been lined with the etched names of all the forgotten now returned. He lit no torches. The room glowed with memory alone. He unrolled a scroll that had never been read aloud. A fragment unearthed years ago in the ruins of an ancient temple, swallowed by desert. A single line, etched in a language no one had ever spoken. But when Elric touched it, he heard it, not in the ear, but in the soul! The first word is not said, it is felt. He spoke the words aloud. The chamber breathed. Stone cracked softly. The names on the wall did not fade. They shifted, as if realigning themselves, a pull towards something central. The keepers exchanged looks. "You believe this is the beginning?" one whispered. "No," Elric said. "I believe it's a doorway." The keepers began their work. They split across the realm. Not to collect names, but sounds, syllables, cadences from ancient songs, lullabies, fragments of languages that no longer had lands. They asked elders to sing without words. They asked children to hum before they knew what songs were. And the pieces came, slowly, painfully, as if drawn from beneath the skin of the world. Some syllables brought tears, others brought fear. One made a woman faint when she heard it sung in the old stone chapel near the western fjords. Bit by bit, they were carved into a great wheel, 12 spokes, one for each keeper, set into the floor beneath the Grand Library's foundation. Elric called it the axis of voice. It was not a weapon, it was not a book, it was a mouth of stone, waiting to speak once more. The night of the final assembly, the city stood still. No bells, no horns, just silence. Not in fear, but in readiness. Below, the keepers stood at the edge of the wheel. Elric entered last, cloak wet with the rain that had begun to fall. In his hand he carried no scroll, only the memory of a name, not his, but the world's. He stepped to the centre, spoke no title, and then breathlessly he whispered the first syllable. The wheel glowed, the air thickened, the stones trembled. The 12 keepers joined in, each speaking their part, not in unison but in succession, like waves returning to a shore long lost. As the final syllable was spoken, the stone pulsed, and from it came no light, no fire, but a name, spoken in no language, and yet every heart in the chamber understood it. Elric wept, not for joy, for relief, because for the first time he felt something older than forgetting, something deeper than any silence Catalyst had ever made. He felt the memory of memory. The world remembered itself. And far beyond, in a chamber long buried in the northern ice, an ancient eye painted on frozen wall cracked in two. Catalyst was watching, and for the first time, it blinked. The blink echoed across the realm, not with sound, but with a tremor so subtle that only the oldest things felt it. The trees that had watched the first fires lit, the stones beneath the abbey of Hollowlight, the bones buried beneath vaults sealed by silence. And Elric, he stood above the axis of voice, heart still beating in the rhythm of the first name. That sacred syllable hadn't been shouted, it had been received. Spoken not as command, but as remembering. Like a name finally returning to the lips of someone who'd mourned it in silence. When the final echo of the first name faded into the walls, the keepers said nothing. None dared speak. Not yet. Not while the weight of it still clung to the stones. Ewan was the first to break the stillness. It heard us. Elric turned. No! It remembered us. Above them, the storm that had begun as a whisper became a cry. Rain fell. not in sheets but in threads, long and delicate, as if the sky were weeping with restraint. Lanterns across Westminster guttered in the wind, and the bells of the city began to sway on their own, not tolling, shivering. That night, all across the realm, the dreams changed. Children woke with names on their tongues they had never heard. Lovers dreamed of each other's ancestors. The mad whispered in perfect recollection of things lost before their births. And in the distant north, in a place long sealed beneath ice and ash, a black cathedral began to thaw. Slowly, reluctantly, it had no door, no altar, no worshippers, only a single throne carved from petrified silence. And above it, etched into stone with no hand, the broken eye. Catalyst had always been watching, but now it was awake. Elric knew it would come. He stood in the watchtower before dawn, watching mist crawl over the rooftops. In his hand he held a stone medallion, engraved not with a name, but with the impression of one. A gift left on his window the night after the first name was spoken. No note, no herald, just placed. He turned it slowly in his hand. "What are you?" he whispered. The answer came, not in word, but in vision. A world without names. People walking past each other without recognition. Children never spoken to. Songs never finished. Graves never marked. A silence so complete, it breathed. That was Catalyst. Not a cult, not a council, a condition, a disease of forgetting. And now, like a cornered animal, it would strike not with secrecy but with desperation. Later that day, word arrived. The Abbey of Sindril was gone, not burned, not razed, gone. In its place, a crater of glass, smooth, cold, clean, as if memory had been peeled from the land. No names remained, not in the airs, not even in the wind. When a keeper arrived and tried to speak aloud, her voice failed. No sound left her. Elric rode there that night. He walked into the centre of the crater, sat upon the cold glass, and waited. He stayed until his breath fogged silver in the dark, until even the stars above seemed to blink slower. Then slowly he pulled a small stone from his pouch, a marker, simple, the kind used by children in garden graves. He pressed it into the centre of the crater and whispered, "We remember you. Even if we don't know who you were, even if we never will, we remember that you were." The wind returned, so did the sound, and a single leaf fell from nowhere, landing on the marker. He wept, quietly, not because they were gone, but because, for a moment, they had almost been truly erased. And that, he now knew, was what Catalyst craved above all, not destruction. Oblivion. Back in Westminster, a decision was made. Elric summoned the keepers, the stewards, the elders, the orphan scribes, and even the few noble houses who still held to oaths older than their bloodlines. He stood at the centre of the circle hall, where laws had once been passed, where kingdoms had once been carved, but he did not speak from the dais. He stood on the floor, among them. "The war is no longer about scrolls," he said. "It is not fought in cathedrals or vaults. It is fought in us, in our willingness to speak, to remember, to carry each other." He held up the medallion. "This was left for me, a symbol, no name, just the shape of one." He looked at each face. "Catalyst does not need to kill, it only needs to convince us to forget each other." He stepped forward. "So we will become the opposite. We will be the voices at every bedside, the hands at every grave, the names whispered into every cup of water. We will not make war. We will make remembrance so loud that forgetting cannot stand in its presence." That day, a new order was formed. Not soldiers, not spies. Carriers! Men and women, young and old, sworn not to defend the past, but to walk with it, speak it, weave it into daily life. No temples, no scripture, only presence, only voice. Each was given a single object, a stone pendant, blank, waiting. Because no symbol would be assigned. It would earn its shape through memory carried. And Elric, who had once been a boy nameless beneath a stable, stood at the centre of it all. Not to lead, to remember with them. Together, they would walk into the coming dark. And when Catalyst came, it would not find silence waiting. It would find 1,000 names spoken in unison. The first carrier left Westminster under moonlight. No procession, no farewell. Just a cloak, a pendant, and a name whispered into their hand. Not their own, but someone else's. A name to guard, to speak, to keep alive. By the end of the week, 100 had followed. They dispersed like seeds into every forgotten corner of the realm. Old roads, abandoned villages, borderlands where the maps had curled with age and no one dared mark anymore. Their work was not to teach or preach. It was simpler and harder to remember where memory had died. They lit no fires, wore no armour, but the world began to change in their footsteps. A ruined tower near the eastern cliffs began to sing faintly at dawn, only when a carrier stood beneath it, repeating the name of a girl who had once watched ships from its window. A well in the withering vale, once dry, filled overnight after a carrier whispered the story of a healer drowned unjustly within it 3 generations ago. And near the edges of the northern marsh, where once no birds had sung, a chorus of unseen voices began to hum an ancient lullaby every dusk. No one knew who they belonged to, but someone had remembered them. Catalyst did not attack. It retreated, or so it seemed. Elric knew better. This was not surrender. It was regathering, and it came one night, quietly. In the form of a question. Delivered by a small child, barefoot, dust-streaked, no older than 10, who appeared at the gates of the Grand Library just after twilight. He held no token, no letter, only words. "If you could forget your pain, would you?" Elric knelt before him. "Who taught you that?" The child tilted his head, confused. "I just heard it." Elric looked into the boy's eyes and saw absence, not emptiness, but a hollow space where something had once been placed, then gently removed. A name, a face, a mother. He brought the child in, fed him, gave him a blanket, let him sleep. But that night, Elric stood at the top of the tower and looked to the sky. And for the first time in weeks, the eye returned, dim, flickering, not whole, but present, watching. Catalyst had not left, it had entered another phase, no longer stealing names, now it would offer forgetting as a gift. And who would refuse it? The mother who lost her son to war, the child who woke from dreams of fire, the man who could not remember his own father's voice. What happens when forgetting feels like mercy? Elric called a gathering, not of nobles, not of scholars, but of those who had suffered most. He summoned the broken, the nameless, the orphaned, the wronged, and he asked them the same question. If you could let it go, all of it, would you? At first, silence. Then a woman stood, bent with age, eyes faded to silver. "I buried 6 children. I cannot remember their cries anymore, only the weight of them, the nights, the ache." She paused, her voice shook. "And still, I need that weight because it's all I have left of them." Elric bowed his head. A young man rose next, burned across half his face, voice low. "They told me forgetting would bring peace, but peace without memory isn't peace. It's emptiness with a smile." Others followed. Not all agreed. Some wept, some left the hall in silence. But a truth emerged, not sharp, not shouted, but firm. The pain was real, and real things are worth remembering, even when they hurt, especially when they hurt. From that day forward, the carriers began wearing 2 pendants, one etched with a name they preserved, and one left blank for a pain they carry, not to be spoken, not to be erased, but to be held, because memory was not just light, it was shadow, and both must be seen or neither can be trusted. Elric placed his own second pendant upon his chest. He never told anyone what it stood for, but some nights, when he sat alone beneath the willow, he whispered to it softly, as if afraid even the wind might hear, not for himself, but for the name he could no longer remember. The one Catalyst had already taken, long ago, and yet, even for that, he did not seek erasure. He chose to carry it. Because to carry sorrow is to prove that you lived, that someone did, and that their absence too deserves its place. So the war continued, not with blood, not with fire, but with breath, with bearing. And every name whispered into darkness became a torch the silence could not smother. The wind changed in the last days of autumn. It came not from the mountains nor the sea, but from the old places, the hollow ruins, the forgotten chapels, the woods where no birds nested anymore. It blew cold, but not from weather. It was a memory wind, carrying with it not names, not faces, but emptiness. The carriers felt it first, not in their bodies, but in their pendants. One by one, the blank stones began to darken, not with dirt or shadow, but with silence. A kind of dead weight. The names they carried remained unchanged, still etched, still strong, but the blank pendants, the ones meant to hold pain, grew heavier. Some carriers began to falter. A few returned, their eyes wide with grief they could no longer name. One collapsed at the gates of Lawnwood, unable to speak a single word, though his throat bore no wound. It was Ewan who saw it first. The silence has begun to feed. Elric stood beside him at the map table, fingers tracing the outermost edges of the known lands. "We taught the people how to carry memory," Elric murmured. "Catalyst has taught them how to crave forgetting." "Not taught," Ewan said bitterly. "Infected." That night the eye returned, but this time not in the sky. It appeared in mirrors, reflections, pools of water, in the glaze of a child's open eye as he stared too long into nothing. One woman screamed when she saw it reflected in the wine poured for her dying father. A boy fled his own shadow, claiming it whispered a name he'd never heard, but wept when it vanished because some part of him missed it. Catalyst had changed shape. It no longer erased by force. It offered forgetting as belonging. Elric sat in the silent chapel of the Grand Library, the cold of the stone pew beneath him, grounding his thoughts. The first name still echoed somewhere in his bones, but now it felt distant. Not absent, just drowned out. He laid his hand upon the second pendant on his chest. Not the name pendant, the blank one, and he whispered, "I will carry you, even if no one else does." The pendant warmed, just slightly, enough. He rose. The time had come to enter the place of no names. The place of no names was not a place found on any map, but every keeper had dreamt of it. A void beyond memory, a space beneath forgetting. Not hell, not death, oblivion. It had no doors, no guards, no fire. Just the sensation that nothing had ever been there, and that nothing ever should be. But Elric now believed it wasn't empty. He believed it was full of names never spoken, memories never held, lives never claimed. He gathered 12 carriers, each with 2 pendants, one etched, one blank. He gave no speech, no strategy, only this: we walk together and we speak, always, even if only to each other. They departed at dusk, heading north through the Vale of Hollow Ash, and the moment they crossed into the Forgotten Lands, they knew. The silence there was alive. It moved, it breathed, it reached. They passed through villages without doors, where houses stood but left no footprints. They crossed bridges that should have groaned beneath their steps but made no sound at all. One carrier, Mirren, the youngest, paused beside a dry well. I feel someone," she said. Elric knelt beside her. "Say what you feel." She hesitated, then whispered, "I think someone was left here." "Then say their name." "I don't have it." "Then give them one." She looked up. "Is that allowed?" Elric smiled, softly. "It's necessary." She reached into her pouch, pulled out her blank pendant and pressed it to the stone rim of the well, and spoke. "Your name is Alira. You waited. You mattered. I remember you now." Nothing happened. No wind, no voice, no light. But when she let go of the pendant, it clung to the stone and did not fall. Elric touched her shoulder. "That is how we win," they continued, and at last they reached it. Not a gate, not a city. A clearing, so still that no bird dared fly across it. At the centre stood a pillar of pure black stone, smooth, ancient, taller than any tree. Around it no grass, no moss, only dust, and silence so thick it pressed against the ribs. The carriers stood in a circle around it. Elric stepped forward. He took the name pendant from his chest, the one that had been with him since the beginning, and he pressed it to the pillar. "I name you," he whispered. "I name you not to claim you, but to release you from the hands of silence. I name you because you existed." And then he sang, not with melody, not with harmony, but with intention. A name stretched into breath, into rhythm, into being. The carriers joined, one by one. 12 voices, imperfect, trembling, but true, and the pillar began to crack, not collapse, not shatter. Out from its centre poured not darkness, but sound, tiny, fragile, endless names. Names falling like rain, each one landing softly upon the ground. And where they touched, grass grew, and flowers, and memory. They had not destroyed the place of no names, they had baptized it in remembrance. And far away, in every village, every home, every silent chapel, people awoke with a name on their lips they had never heard before, but which felt like it had always belonged to them. Catalyst had no reply, because Catalyst did not understand love, and love is made of memory. Winter returned quietly, as though it too had grown gentle with memory. Snow fell not in storms, but in sighs, soft, steady, unhurried. It dusted the rooftops of Westminster like ash from a long-burned fire, and wrapped the silent roads in blankets of white, so pristine they seemed never to have been walked. But they had. The carriers had crossed them, the names had echoed here, and beneath the snow, the earth remembered. Elric stood once more beneath the willow tree, older now, thinner, the colour of his beard nearly gone to silver. In his hand he held no book, no scroll, not even a pendant, just a thread of woven grass. An old tradition from a people no longer drawn on maps. He wrapped it slowly around his finger. A child approached from the path behind, quiet as a falling flake. "Are you him?" the boy asked. Elric turned. "Who? The man who gives names back." Elric smiled. "No, child, I only remind people they never truly lost them." The boy held out something, a slip of parchment curled and soft. "I found this in the wall of our barn. No one knows who it belongs to." Elric took the paper. One name, one line. No more. He knelt eye level with the boy. "Then I'll tell you what to do." He handed the parchment back. "Plant it." The boy blinked. "Plant it?" Elric nodded. "In the spring, dig a hole, put the name inside, cover it and let the rain and time do the rest." "Will something grow?" "Yes," Elric said. "But not what you expect." He touched the boy's heart gently. "It will grow here." And as the boy walked away, holding the name close, Elric looked to the horizon and felt, for the first time in all his years, peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of knowing the silence would never again be alone. In the weeks that followed, something changed across the land. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but deeply. Old roads began to hum, wells began to whisper, doors opened where no doors had stood in decades. Names returned, not shouted, not carved into stone, but woven into life. Bakers whispered them into rising bread, midwives sang them over newborns. Gravediggers paused, pressing a name to their hearts before they let the earth take its place. The carriers became something new, no longer wanderers, they became roots, planted in every town, every forest, every forgotten field, each one carrying two names, one known, one unknown. And the people began to do the same, because they understood now, to carry a name is to hold the world, to speak it is to feed the fire, to remember is to resist the slow undoing of all things. As the final frost passed and the first bloom cracked through the thawed soil, a bell rang in the grand library, a small sound, one chime, and the library doors opened wide. A new book sat upon the central dais, untitled, unbound, open to the first page. On it, just one line. "We are not born with names, we become them." And beneath it, a single signature. Elric, carrier of carriers, last of the unnamed. He was not buried. No grave marked his passing. But people say that when the wind moves just right through the upper halls of the library, you can hear a name being spoken that no one can remember, but everyone somehow knows. And somewhere, in a field where the willow trees bend low and the sun lingers just a little longer, there is a patch of earth where flowers grow in the shape of letters. No fence, no plaque, just colour, just silence, just memory, and the whisper of names on the wind. Alira, Mirren, Thorn, Cathan, Amarin, mother, child, you. This is the end of the story. Not of war, not of struggle, but of forgetting, for as long as one voice remains, as long as one name is carried, Catalyst will not win, because the greatest rebellion is not a sword, it is a whispered name in the dark. And we remember.